start the meeting now. When Jeff and that is finished. Thank you. Councillors, first up we have apologies. Do we have any apologies for absence or early departure? Mark?
Yes, Mr Chair. Unfortunately, I'll have to leave at around 1:30 today. I've got another council thing I've got to head to after that, but hopefully it'll be...
I'm going to explain the timing issue around then shortly when we go to the contents, but we'll Mark's apologies for early departure.
2 o'clock I could make it at the latest away.
Okay, well, you'll when you hear that, you'll see.
Chair, I have a departure as well, about 1:45 for about an hour.
Margaret, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, you'll be in the same boat as Mark. I'll explain that timing issue shortly. Any other apologies? Jeff, sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Oh.
Yes, Jeff, thanks. Yep.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Look, I've got a meeting with a resident around about 4:30. But I get the feeling it's going to be a really short meeting, so it may not be necessary, but I just thought I'd flag it anyway.
You said the words.
For those who don't know, Jeff, the Deputy Mayor is the greatest jinxer of meeting times that we have in this council.
Now he's doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
Every time.
Okay, any other apologies? If not, I'll move the apologies be accepted. Those, second Councillor Bunting, those in favour, against, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Confirmation of the agenda. Councillors, apart from the list you've got for the open and public excluded, we have an arrangement to do with the Peacock item in public excluded, where outside guests are coming in to address us, as well as the city solicitor. That's been arranged for 1:30, which will be the resumption after lunch. There's been a lot of work gone to that arrangement, so we can't really change that time. That's why I was referring that to both Margaret and yourself, Mark. We will, and the outside guests will be pretty much the first part of that.
It's around half an hour or so?
They've been given half an hour to address us, yes.
Okay, I'll be able to be here for that, but yep. Fantastic.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Sorry?
I'm going to read that bit out there, just so that for the public.
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Yep. Just need to read that bit there as part of the confirmation of the agenda.
Yeah, I was going to do that. Sorry about that. Other than that, I plan to break for lunch, let's say around 1:45, give or take. But we have to go with that 1:30 time. Sorry, the other part, councillors, is item 10, information only reports. They are not going to be a staff presentation on them, but if councillors signify to me in advance any items they want to raise from there specifically, I won't be going through the reports, so not now, but maybe a morning tea. We'll note them and we'll give the time for the question to be asked about that, because all of those are for information only. There's no decisions to be made, but questions can be asked about specific items raised. So that's sort of how we're refining that to be handled. Other than that, I'll move the agenda be accepted, seconded by Councillor Bunting, the Deputy, no, whoever, Councillor Bunting will do. I was looking that way first. And those in favour, against, carried unanimously, thanks. Any declarations of interest on any item, or Councillor? If, Jeff, you've still got your hand raised, have you? Was that from before?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was from before.
Sorry about that.
Okay, no, that's fine, thanks. Okay, so we're on to the public forum. We have 2 speakers coming in by Zoom. They're both speaking on the housing development strategy, which is item 7. So first we've got Peter Southwick from the Community Lands Trust. So Amy, are you bringing Peter in? Okay, what about Louis Brame? Okay, we'll start with Louis Brame. Kia ora, Louis. We're going to give you, I believe, 3 minutes. Is that what you've been advised?
3 minutes, 5 minutes would be a good start, I think.
Well, sorry, the staff have said 5, so the floor is yours. If you want to leave time for some questions, that's fine. Thanks, Louis.
Okay, cool. So who am I? Where do I fit into the equation? I'm part of the Waikato Plan Regional Housing Initiative. We're essentially the umbrella reflective of community groups that have a strong interest in affordable housing in the region. Our membership includes Te Rerenga, Rikirikiri Roa, People's Project, Climate Water, Hamilton City Council, and other groups, Koti Pacifica, Waikato Tani, for example. Our vision is that every person is well housed, every family is well housed in sustainable and flourishing communities within the region. Our high-level approach is essentially to provide advocacy, a connected, coordinated approach so the region gets a good outcome. The best way I can think about this is everyone paddling the waka at the same time in the same direction to get a better outcome. Why we've come together, so we know that there's a housing shortage within the region, 7,500. We know that there's 51,000 houses needed over 25 years. It might not necessarily sound like much, but as soon as you put the challenge in around trying to make 75% of those housing affordable, then straight away there's a challenge. We know affordability is a challenge because the median income multiple, which is a measure of affordability, is greater than 6 times. Affordable is around 3. With respect to social housing, the challenges there, we've got 2,000 people on the social housing register in the region. In December 2018, that was 896, so you're basically doubling your numbers. COVID's only exacerbating that problem, particularly for Māori and Pacifica. And I guess ultimately we know that having good housing is really important for strong, healthy communities. But what we've done today is we've done a housing stock take. We formed a stakeholder group. The last meeting we had 50 odd members there, so that's really promising. Maxine and Sarah attended that, so it's really good to see some proactive councillors getting involved. In the process of finalising our strategy document, action plan. Now key themes around that is around affordability pipeline and funding, advocacy, data lake, healthy homes and toolkits. I guess the reason I've elaborated a bit more on that is you can just see how the enormity of the problem that's at hand, and no one person can do it alone, and it's going to take multiple efforts for a bigger impact. So that's why we're here today supporting the recommendation. It's going to be a top to bottom requirement to basically achieve what we're trying to achieve. And that's kind of the crux of, I guess, the message today. We've got a big problem. We want to basically support Hamilton City Council coming up with a comprehensive plan that really informs your long-term planning and enables affordable housing accessible to everyone in the region. Kia ora. Is that 3 minutes or 2 plus?
You've done very well. It's about dead on 3, and you've got a couple of minutes for questions. Now, I've got a question from Councillor Hamilton. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Kia ora, Louis. Thanks for sharing this morning. Just in terms of some of the work we've been doing around the Metro Spatial Plan and planning, how important is the locked up sort of land supply in terms of the affordability issues going forward, do you think?
Yeah, look, I think there's no one tool to enable affordable housing, but obviously having access to land is going to increase the availability of housing, and that's going to have a positive effect on house pricing, things not escalating as fast as it is at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Wilson by Zoom there. Ewan, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Dave. Hey, Louis, thank you for your presentation. A couple of questions. Tell me if you and the organisation you represent are at all concerned about the destruction of the biodiversity in the city when it comes to greenfield development, and how you would like to see that mitigated and what steps you believe your members should take. And secondly, could you comment on your thoughts about trying to promote intensity within the CBD as a meaningful way of providing affordable houses. And my third point, could you give me any examples where significant developments into greenfields have actually led to affordable housing, keeping in mind the current economic status that we see here in Hamilton? Property prices just seem to be going up and up, and so we're not seeing that affordability. So 4 distinct questions.
I'll maybe have to replay that, then you've kind of hit me pretty hard there. Look, I'm not going to qualify myself as the expert in terms of all the realms of questions that you've got there. Look, I think, like I said previously, you need to look at all avenues for affordability of housing, and definitely intensification with housing is one avenue. Obviously done the right way. I have seen some of the releases and what have you, but we need to do it in the right way. Sorry, I've forgotten your questions already. So
There was a biodiversity one, Louis, and also the CBD for a place for intensification.
Sorry, I didn't catch it. It's quite echoey in the chambers.
A biodiversity question at the start, and one about
biodiversity question.
Yeah, and one about the CBD being an appropriate place for intensification.
Yeah, look, again, I won't qualify myself as the expert on all these matters, but one of the things that we have around approaching these types of development is essentially having a master planned approach and kind of thinking through some of those challenges. And I think with the housing strategy that your team are going to work away, some of those issues and challenges can be addressed and thought through as part of that.
Thanks. Mayor Paula, did you have a question?
No, I was going to just leave it for now, thanks. I'm not
Okay.
sure. Well, okay, I will. Which is really just about that. Sorry, it's about that infill and the ability to create lower cost housing. Because land is so expensive in the greenfields, how do you think we're going to get a diverse range of housing? Are there any tools that you've explored that you think council should be looking at to create mixed areas of housing so that they're not all large and expensive?
Yeah, hey, look, one of the things I really like is around that inclusionary zoning work that you as council you're working with. So some way of, like, when you're looking to rezone an area, some way to basically share that up with the community. Okay. Yeah, that's one avenue. But what I'd suggest, if from this meeting I can take away a series of questions and go back to my collective, because I'm one voice of many, and within our ranks there's pretty much a lot of expertise.
So that is a question of interest to me around different typologies of housing and how we drive that, because developers will tell you the base section cost is so much that they have to get so much yield and so much value back on that land investment. So just interested in the toolbox particularly. And yes, we're talking to the inclusionary zoning at the local government conference tomorrow with a remit, which Maxine's going to talk to, so that will be good.
Okay, thanks very much, Louis. We need to move on to the next participant. Thanks. Thanks for your time and the questions this morning. We've got...
excuse me, Chair. If I could just have one more.
Okay, please put your hands up early, guys, so that we don't have that again. Maxine?
Kia ora, and apologies for that, Chair. Louis, the government has just released the urban design MPS, and how might you think that could address some of the issues that we're facing around the affordability piece?
In terms of high rises? Yeah. And look, I can't answer that question straight off the bat. I'll take that back to my group.
Kia ora, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Look, we'll be getting a report back with the housing strategy, so there'll be time to address a lot of these issues that have been raised by the 3-4 questioners. But we need to move on to Peter Southwick from the Community Lands Trust. Peter's available now. So Amy, if you could put Peter on. Thank you, Louis.
Great, thanks guys. Kia ora.
Good morning.
Morning, Peter. You've got 5 minutes all up. If you can fit some question time into that would be great, but the floor's yours, or at least the electronic floor is.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I'm Peter Southwick. I'm one of the trustees on the Waikato Community Land Trust. And my experience is 5 years with the Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust. I've been a developer. I've developed affordable housing. So I've had a bit of experience on both sides of the fence, I guess. Just in terms of today, I reckon it's great that council are starting to get their heads around affordable housing, and it looks to me like the Waikato's making some good progress with some of the initiatives. I think the Waikato Regional Housing Initiative is a great idea, and what I like most about it is it really brings together all the diverse groups that are interested in housing, and I think they've got a lot to offer. So, but I think they need some support, and I think that support's well recognised in the formation of the Land Trust. So well done to council for that. I guess the real key for me is inclusionary zoning, and having seen that work so well down in Queenstown, that's the thing that we really need to focus on. And all these questions that I hear from council of how do we provide affordable land, how do we get the price of houses down, the real answer to that is by taking some of the profit off the greedy developers and distributing it. Now, I know that the developers all tell you that they can't afford to give up any of their land. And by the way, inclusionary zoning is a terrible term, doesn't really say what it is. My name for it is a zoning change profit share. I think much better describes what inclusionary zoning is. And I can't give you any better example in terms of developers crying poor and they can't afford to give up any of their land than the recent case down in the Queenstown Council where a developer of a 500 lot subdivision agreed quite willingly to give 12.5% of his completed sections as a contribution to affordable housing. So on his 500 lot subdivision, that's 62 fully developed freehold allotments handed to the housing trust down there, who then can pass on housing on that land at just the cost of building the houses, no land price included, and they've got their various models to make that work. So for me, that's the real focus that I think that can make it work. I understand that at a local government level, at a central government level, and I understand in the conference tomorrow, everybody's lobbying central government to take this by the horns and make it law. But how is it that Queenstown were able to do it at a local government level? And I wonder that it's not an initiative that Hamilton City Council should pursue themselves, particularly if there's a whole lot of stuffing around at central government level, which I predict there will be for years before that ever turns into legislation. So that for me is the real key to it. And I guess my final point is, I think from the land trust's point of view, I really see that as a strategic partnership. And in previous discussions with council, I've got a sense that council feel like, okay, we've established the land trust, you guys get on with it. The success of Queenstown has been that it hasn't just been left for the Lands Trust to get on with it, it's been a partnership with council, and we've worked really closely with them to make the big gains that have happened there. And as I've said before, and I'll say it again for anyone who hasn't heard it, the trust down there have got $50 million of land coming to them via inclusionary zoning. They've got 200 houses in the pipeline, and in a good example of if you build it, they will come. The Labor government's announcement the other day, $6.5 million goes to the Queenstown Trust, interest-free loan for 15 years, which is going to help facilitate the building of 50 units down there that'll see people housed in affordable apartments. So, look, that's really what I've got to say.
Thanks very much, Peter. Very good. Look, I've got time for a couple of questions, I think, on this issue. If not, I think you've been pretty clear with that submission. I can't see any questions, so thank you for your time this morning. We'll be discussing that shortly, but not immediately. So this is being live streamed for anyone who wants to see that as well. So thanks for your time, Peter.
Okay, you're welcome. Good on you guys. Keep up the good work. Let's get some more people in houses.
Fantastic. Okay, councillors, let's move on with the business. Firstly, the confirmation of the open minutes of the 18th of June meeting, which I'll move as a true and correct record, seconded by Councillor Hamilton. Go away, Bunty. Councillors, are there any questions or issues to raise with those minutes? If not, I'll put the resolution to those in favour, say aye. Against, that's carried unanimously, thanks. Councillors, on to the Chair's report, which is item 6. Those of you who were at the council retreat that we had 2 days ago will have heard me say more or less the same as this there. The reason I put this in there is because we have a LTP coming up, and it's clear we don't have the resource fully in place at this point to do some of that forward planning. So I want to identify some of the areas which I thought it was particularly needed for, and planning doesn't come free, it doesn't even come cheap. But if we don't do the planning, we'll be pushed around rather than do the direction setting for this community, and not just for this community, for the areas surrounding Hamilton as well, effectively the Metro Spatial Plan area, plus bits off to the side and up to Auckland. Now look, that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to open up to questions. I've got one from Sarah to start with, and if there are any other issues arising, we can identify them as well and perhaps come back to them in resolution. We've got a list here, but I'm starting with Sarah, then the list we've got on the board. Sarah, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. My question's around, I guess, our growth strategy and the Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy, which is 10 years old. If there's a desire from this council to look at shifting the dial and how we're growing and trying to grow up more and having a greater level of infill or intensification, what kind of measures could we take to beyond the NPS that's just come out to actually I guess achieve that?
Jen,
and could we, I guess what I'm wanting to know is, could we actually have some more focused discussion on this really soon?
Jen, thanks.
Councillor Sarah, thanks for the question. And I imagine that a number of people feel the same in terms of when are we going to have this conversation. So there are a number of layers to this. So the NPS definitely has sped up our consideration of a full district plan review, so obviously we would have it through that process. But as we head into the LTP, you'll recall during the first round of lockdown we had a couple of briefings about the growth principles that we will use heading into the LTP, and one of those new growth principles off the back of the conversations we've had with you all absolutely speaks to what you're talking about in terms of the balance between up and out and how we're going to approach intensification. So we will put that back on the table so that we can make sure that we've captured that in a way that suits our elected members, and we'll do that as soon as we can. And then to your point about the Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy, so in September we should have a final version of the Metro Spatial Plan for you to sign off, and then the team are currently working on how we go about doing the urban growth strategy and what that timing looks like, and it will really depend on how we want to approach the district plan change. It may be that those two things happen in unison, so a long way of saying LTP conversation, then the Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy conversation, and the district plan change. All of those conversations will include your your desire to see that infill defined more clearly.
Jen, I'm wondering if we can get a sort of a work program that sort of follows what you've there written out. And
Yep, the team are working on that right now.
Great. Sarah, anything more?
Thanks, Jen. And just to follow up on that, in terms of the growth principles, there was one on efficient land use, but it wasn't very specific, and it could still kind of mean different things to different people. So still isn't, even with that growth principle, a clear vision. So are we going to refine that more, or does that have to come through that HUG's, review?
So no, in terms of the growth principles for the LTP, so we had those 2 briefings to refine those. If they're still not where the elected members want them to be, then we need to address that, and they will be back in front of you shortly.
Okay. Could we have are we going to have scenarios where we could say, we want A, B and C in terms of different levels of intensification versus greenfield?
So we do have growth scenarios, so we'll talk you through the growth scenarios. So we need growth scenarios so that we can plan the investment against them, basically. So we can bring those to you shortly too.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks. Mark, please.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to ask for a diagrammatic work program so I could get my head around when the district plan changes start. So when you say district plan, that's something we do once every, 10 years, is it? Okay, and so the timing on that is, we normally take how long to do that?
Oh, that's a good
15 years? Or?
I think the last one took between 3 and 4 years, but given the requirements, the legal requirements around the MPS, the team are laser focused on getting this one up on the skis and across the line in pretty short period of time.
So in this
We
term,
have been talking about 18 months to 2 years, hadn't we?
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Right. So we could be, our workload could be a lot around that and the LTP at the same time next year. That's what I'm saying. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Good stuff. Okay. Question to you, Chair, or maybe to Chris. Where are we at with R2 and the timing on that?
I think the best person to ask is Blair behind you there. There's certainly work bubbling away on that in the background. Blair, thanks.
Just timing-wise. Yeah.
So timing-wise, at the moment, the agreement with Waikato District Council says 2039 is the earliest R2 can come to the city. Yep. Coming to the next strategic growth meeting will be an agreement with Waikato District Council, which will enable us to vary that time frame, essentially basically allowing us to request that land to come in a lot earlier. So we could make that happen within the next few years, and that's going to be part of the growth scenarios conversation that will occur through the LTP. But I think the important thing to note with R2 is, in picking up Chair's report here, is that we haven't done any detailed planning for that growth area. It is signalled and has been signalled for a long time as a future growth area of the city. Infrastructure is largely at the boundary, but we still need to do the work to actually understand what does that look like. Also the commercial discussions with the major landowners in that area, but we're certainly, everything's pointing towards that area being developed a lot more quickly than was currently signalled.
Yeah. So what safeguards have we got to ensure that, okay, so we are taking this...
Mark, can you speak into the mic?
Sorry,
I realise Blair's behind you, but
okay.
other people have got to hear.
Hang on, Blair, I'll put you onto my reversible camera. So there we go. What safeguards have we got that, we know what's going into R2, so when we do eventually end up with that land, it fits in with what we were going to do anyway.
That's the reason that we're identifying this, and for what Blair's just said, because we have developers knocking on our doors. We don't know exactly what we want to go where, except possibly the spine road through it. But the exact alignment we don't know. We don't know what facilities it should service or anything like that, even though it is the closest greenfields land to the central city now, possibly. So we have to get planning done so that we're not driven by bright ideas or wealthy developers.
Good Tamahiri, basically. I get you. Thank you. Okay, no, that's
Blair,
cool.
did you want to add to that?
Yeah, look, I think just to build on the point, councillors, that same principle applies to HT1, applies to WA. So you'll note at the very, very back of the open agenda, there's a map that sort of was referred to the Chair's report. It's the very last page, and it shows the future growth areas of the city. There are a number of those areas, R2, which is to the east of Ruakura, HT1 to the north of Hamilton, WA out to the west. There's also
The map up there,
okay.
Blair.
That's a good map.
Yeah, so that map shows. Yeah, so you can see where the top, the hatch piece at the top, that's referred to as HT1, but it's effectively Horatū Horsham Downs north. That area.
It's inside the road, basically. Yeah.
So that's an area that's subject to a strategic boundary agreement with Waikato District Council. That area will also be part of that varied agreement, which will come back to this committee for the next cycle, which will effectively allow us to bring that forward a lot earlier than it's currently signalled. Then if we look to the south of the city, you'll see that area that's in pink, that's land inside the Southern Links boundary. We're in conversations with Waipaha District Council around a similar agreement, strategic boundary agreement, which again would allow us to work in a long-term planning fashion with Waipaha to actually bring that land to the city at the appropriate time. And then the yellow section is a piece of land that's currently not subject to any agreement, but again it's land that's Waikato District Council, but will be severed by the expressway. So as Councillor Dave's Chair's report identifies, it's something that we need to pick up as a conversation as well in terms of another piece of land that we need to have conversations with Waikato District Council over. Now, I think the key thing to note with all these areas of land is that through the LTP we will need to request funding and support to actually do that early work. To do the planning, thinking work for that area of land requires considerable effort, and it also requires early conversations with key landowners because ultimately we hold a very powerful tool in terms of rezoning of land and changing of boundaries. But ultimately, we want to also understand the likely nature of future. Look at those land areas, some of those high-level strategic agreements with landowners so we can secure some of those principles and key land decisions early before we actually change boundaries and start the rezoning process. So that's what the Chair is referring to in his report, and certainly as staff we are right behind that. How do we use the new tools that are available to us, the new planning techniques, but also smart ways of engaging with these future growth areas early, and they may not necessarily be developed for some time, but we've got to work smartly and early as opposed to coming to those growth areas very late and then paying a premium for land and working with developers who have already made a number of decisions. So.
Okay.
Perhaps an example of some of the other pressures coming on, even outside the expressway alignment, the area, I'm not sure, I'm calling it R3, but it's where the Tainui TGH commercial land would go if they develop the inner land as a general show where it is. But if we go next to the Wairere Drive with residential, we have to swap it essentially for that area outside there, and that's until the last year or so not really been envisaged. So we've got to do some extra work on that. It's certainly it's no longer using the expressway as a boundary though.
Can I ask just one more question? Just regards, just a very short question, if I might.
Please.
Have we given much thought to, because it's all very convenient making a big road our boundary, and that works well, but are we going to create effectively what we've got with R2, just on a grander scale, where people are going to want to build on the other side of the road? And that's going to affect what happens right around those boundaries. Are we just creating another headache by using that as a boundary? I mean, I know it's very easy to use, but...
Blair might want to jump into this as well, but the line has to go somewhere.
Yeah, it does.
And NZTA also have some requirements in terms of development around those major roads. So it just, right now, and in terms of the planning that was done many years ago in terms of the HT1 and the R2 areas, it just seemed like a natural and obvious boundary to use. But I totally take your point. The minute that the boundary is in a different place, it's closer to more people who want the boundary slightly further out. So there will always be somebody on either side of those lines, and there will continue to be pressures for Hamilton to go in certain directions. So
you're right.
that's the hand we're dealt, really.
Cool, I've got many
I
more,
think
but I'll ask later.
we're sort of identifying a problem back in 1989, the local government reorganisation, where Hamilton basically had most of the boundaries drawn on the back fence of the last house, when there was no room to grow, whereas a city like Dunedin, for instance, goes literally in some parts 50 kilometres out to the countryside, so they can plan in a sensible way and are in charge of the planning right from day one. We haven't been, so we're having to identify these blocks and work through different arrangements with different neighbouring councils and NZTA and so forth. So look, we've got a long question and comment list, and that's good because it's an important subject. I've got Rob next, and then Ewan, Paula, and everyone else who's put up their hand following that. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try and keep my questions short and to the point. My questions are also around the district plan, given that the NPS urban design statement becomes effective in law today. And I note elsewhere in the report, and I can't quite find out where I read it, but there is a briefing planned for later this month on this specific subject. I'm just wondering if we can make sure that in that briefing, I've a series of questions. One is, will we need to have a new draft district plan ready by 2022, which is when this NPS becomes, when it actually rolls itself out to be effective?
Yeah, so there are dates in the NPS that require us to have those provisions locked into our district plan at certain times. So yes, is the answer.
Okay, and I understand that the government's NPS is based on a Becker report that they commissioned, and they're overlaying this same report over the 4 councils that were named in the press release. Is that Becker report available? Will it be available to us so that we get an opportunity to read exactly where central government's coming from and why they've told us that we have to do what we have to do in terms of the plan changes?
I don't know the answer to that actually. Luke, do you know more about that?
Come up to a mic, thanks, Luke, for the speakers listeners on Zoom.
Through you.
Thanks,
Chair. Rob, the evidence base for the government's policy position is all available on the MFE website. So there's not one report, there's a series of reports, there's a series of investigations that the government commissioned to support this policy position. So I'm not aware of a particular Becker report as such. The major evidential piece that supported it was some analysis that was done by PwC. And that's all of that technical information is available on the MFE website. I'm happy to send a link for elected members post today for your reading pleasure. There's literally thousands of pages of documentation supporting it. So
we'll take.
Sorry, I've opened a can of worms.
We'll take the executive summary
from you. On that one.
But we do. We've got a briefing. Sorry, it's not in August. It's 9th of September. So we spoke to you last week about it, and now we're drilling a bit deeper to talk about some of the more relevant provisions and the timeframes, etc., and how we can work with you to achieve compliance.
And as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are some non-negotiables that the government have rolled out as part of this NPS that we have to, and I think the on-site car parking is one of those that I think has had some media attention.
Yeah, that's correct. So there are some things that are, there's elements of the NPS that are very directive, but equally there's a lot of scope for creativity and influence and for elected members to shape the outcomes that are right for the city in that document, and that's the conversation we want to have with you over the next really 6 months, really.
So this briefing will roll out what the non-negotiables are so that...
Yep.
And do they take effect from today? For example, if I was to lodge a resource consent tomorrow, could I build a 70-unit development on 1.9 hectares in Flagstaff with no parking on site?
Just using that as an example.
Just hypothetically, eh?
Yeah. Look, in all seriousness, this is the implementation of the NPS with respect to resource consents from today is a grey matter. It hasn't been tested. So we are looking very deeply at what that means for any new resource consents that come in. My preliminary advice to you is that the standards in the plan take precedence because we don't have to remove the parking standards for 18 months. So the plan is the plan. The MPS signals very clearly there's an expectation that we will have to remove those within a certain period of time. But the reality is if that someone comes in and really presses on that matter, we're going to have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. That on the 9th of September, we'll have a much more detailed view on that, but that's our preliminary view at this point.
Okay, and so that potentially presents a risk, doesn't it? Not only for staff, but also for council, that we might end up with outcomes that that are contradictory to our existing and approved district plan.
Look, I don't want to talk about hypotheticals. I can only tell you about what we're in. We're in a what we call a regulatory kind of grey zone at the moment. We're working really hard to provide some definition around how we implement that kind of scenario. We'll talk to you about that on the 9th of September. But as I said, my preliminary view at the moment is the district plan provisions stand. Notwithstanding that, the MPS signals an intention to remove minimum parking standards, but we don't have to give effect to those for 18 months. So if and when someone comes in to lodge an application that rubs hard against those provisions, we're going to have to look at it on a case-by-case basis and look at it really closely. Is it a risk? I don't know. Equally, it might present other types of opportunities for travel demand management. So I think we just need to be really open and think about alternative ways of dealing with traffic generation. And I think for me that's actually a reasonably positive space. It signals it aligns very closely with the desire that we've heard from elected members around improving public transport, walkability, looking at travel demand management. So I think it's a bit of both.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
We want to de-risk ourselves though by getting onto this as quick as possible.
No, I agree, and that's my concern. That the media's told us a bunch of things. Well, it's come through the media a bunch of things, and we've got the same state of grey, if you like, as you've got around what we can and can't do. Thank you.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Ewan, then Mayor Paula. Thanks. Ewan, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Dave. Look, my question to staff is sort of on the same lines of questioning as the others. And it's just about what step we prioritise. I read the Chairman's report and I acknowledge the issues, Dave, you raised, and the mention that the current district plan for Rotokauri and others are out of date. And then there's the call for the need to develop a structured plan for R2, HD1, WA, and then the Burton block, etc. But over all of this, we've also got the realisation of the district plan and the need that we need to review that, and obviously with the MPS applying pressure. And of course, it could take a number of years for that then to be fully operative. My question is, shouldn't we be prioritising above all else the district plan? And
he's questioning
that's
me.
the first question. And the second question is, rather than focusing on structured plans for areas that are currently not in the city, shouldn't we be refocusing our concentration on encouraging infill brown site developments rather than eroding green sites and all the biodiversity consequences?
The reason that I've covered both sides of that coin that you've mentioned, simply because even with your comment the other day of 70% infill, that still leaves 30% greenfields, and we're running out of usable greenfield space at the moment. And one of the contentions I've heard around this table is that limiting your greenfields developable options also contributes to increasing land prices faster. We have to have a choice there as well. So in order to have a choice, both for brownfields and greenfields, we have to have the first cut at least of planning in those areas. And we wouldn't want to pick off, I wouldn't think, every single potential greenfields growth area with a new plan all at once, but we certainly need to start with the priority candidates, and ones like R2 are in that category. They're ones that are within the expressway with services available to their doorstep, literally. If we don't do that, we will face landowners coming to us with development proposals that we are legally required to consider without a plan. So, best will in the world, we have to operate on both fronts, I believe. Jen, like to comment?
Yeah, Councillor Ewan, two slightly different pieces of work. So yes, absolutely, hard and fast into the district plan change conversation. And you will see that come through very early on in terms of the LTP planning and budgeting. The other part of that, in terms of where we grow and how we focus and prioritise attention and investment, that is part of the growth scenarios conversation that we'll be having with you through the LTP process as well. So you will have the opportunity to guide us in terms of how you want us to focus our attention and investment for the next 10 years in that growth space very soon.
Thank you. And if I may, Chair Dave, just a question to your commentary. I wasn't aware that Peacocks and Rotokauri, that all of that usable land had been sold and used up. Are you saying that, in fact, all of those development plots are already consumed?
No, I'm not saying...
I didn't realise that, in fact, we had reached that point already. I thought we had a number of years before that happens.
Yeah, I'm not saying that, but Peacocks is a good example. We sat on that for 25 years with that plan that was sort of 12 years out of date when Amberfield came to us with their own proposal, which was somewhat outside the plan. Our early development and part of Peacocks has been driven by the owners of a block that have come to us with their proposal, which wasn't exactly what we envisaged back when we did that first plan. So that, and we've had done some work since, and we're catching up in that area. In Rotokauri's case, there's a large infrastructure issue to solve, the swale, very expensive one, before we can open up all of that land, which may mean that some other areas are more shovel-ready than that, if you get what I mean. So there's different issues in different parts of the city, and we have to keep our eye on the long-term future as well as the short-term, I believe.
Mr. Chair, can I just make...
Blair, sorry.
So Ewan, I think fantastic conversation and really, really good points you're making, Councillor Ewan. The other thing that we shouldn't forget here is what we're talking about is actually the Urban Growth Agenda Challenge, which the government have been talking about for 2 or 3 years now, and that encapsulates exactly what these questions are all about. And I also need to just remind everyone that the Metro Spatial Plan, which is... There's a presentation included in the information reports at the end of the agenda today. That's a critically important another layer here, which sits alongside the district plan as a really key informative as to where we see the future form of this metropolitan area developing and some of the key principles that underpin that. So the things that councillors have talked about today, such as intensification, protecting those biodiversity, the nature of the transportation systems that support future growth areas, what are those future growth areas, both intensification and in greenfield. That's what the Metro Spatial Plan's designed to confront head on and give us a really long-term pathway. And the other comment I would make here is that our relationships with the key other partners in responding to the growth is critical here. So Jen referred to NZTA. There are many parts of government who are key partners to this, Treasury, Department of Internal Affairs, Ministry of Housing and Development, etc. And in addition to that, our neighbouring councils, Waikato, Waipa, Regional Council, and of course Waikato Tainui. So these are critical relationships that we're balancing. My final comment would be we are already facing enormous pressure from a range of landowners who are sitting in all those areas either within the city boundary or anticipated beyond the boundary, who are already wanting to engage with Jen's team, Chris's team, myself on growth, and we are simply needing to, as Chair Dave has said, put more effort into getting ahead of those conversations. Otherwise, the conversations will be, in my words, a poor outcome for the city. We want to construct good outcomes that achieve ultimately good solutions that align with the Metro Spatial Plan, but also deliver a range of affordable solutions. And so to do that early is the key part to this.
Blair, final question, if I could, David. This is really the final question. What I'm really concerned about is the tail is wagging the dog. And I guess what I'm not hearing through any of this is how you, and other than maybe the benefits of the IFF, but the reality is this city cannot afford to fund any more of these growth areas. And we certainly can't afford to put the infrastructure on. And so what I'm trying to get an understanding is a structure plan does not build an expectation, does it? It doesn't give any sort of guarantee to a developer that they can expect that there's going to be council writing the check for the infrastructure. So I have nothing against planning. I'm into Metro Spatial Plan. I think that's the best thing. I certainly want to protect my biodiversity.
The question,
Ewan? I
Ewan?
don't want to do any of that suddenly forces us to be beholden to developers and meet their time frame, because this city just cannot afford to do that, and I can't see us being able to afford to do that in the very near future. We've got a deficit. We need to balance our books.
Ewan, I'm not sure what the question is, but we certainly don't want to be beholden to developers, which is why we need our own plans, not to follow their plans, which are often piecemeal because they don't cover the larger areas, things like that. You know, they won't cover where a school should go, for example. A structure plan for an area like Rotokauri or Peacock or R2 will cover where schools go, where community facilities, where major transport corridors go. So we need to have that sort of concept for an area so that we can direct the developers that are beating, like Blair's described, are beating a path to our door in the direction that we envisage for the whole community that's being planned in those areas. It's not exclusive. Yeah. Look, sorry, we need to keep moving. We've got Mayor Paula now. Then I've got Angela, Martin, Jeff and Sarah on the list.
I do think this has gone a little bit off beam from your report, and it is a very important topic, but it's gone way wide. My question is, in respect to your report, you may talk about the boundary changes, and you and I both know, and Ryan knows because we attend that joint meeting, how that is progressing. My question is, however, given that we need to create more competition in the land market, Blair, Luke, about bringing the land prices down to be able to make more affordable housing that we were hearing about before, what is the necessity of these new areas in respect to that? How will that work in that scenario? Will it create more opportunities to bring land price down? At some stage, I'm really interested in understanding how many developers we've got in the relative areas so that we can see, are we working with a wider pool of developers and landowners? Or, because the narrower it is, the less likely we are to create the change that we need. So that is kind of a bit of a broad question, but do we need those new boundaries to reach our target of more affordability? Is it a key part?
To the government urban growth agenda is all about trying to create competition within the land markets and having that supply-demand equation working to ensure that, to your point, affordability is maintained or achieved. So having a range of different solutions for residential development, intensification around transport nodes, different greenfield areas, speaks to having those future growth areas in the greenfield sense on our runway so that they are options available for us as a council. They don't all need to be developed at once, they don't all need to be ready now, but we need to be able to have that future pathway so we can maintain that level of supply-demand competition, Paula. And that's exactly what if Minister Twyford or other members of the urban growth ministers would hear, they would be talking about that same concept. And you'll recall that the IFF legislation, which has just now come into law this week, was designed to help councils and development communities fund those new areas to create greater supply, to create that competition.
So I need to know where the balance point is for council. We've got this massive subdivision in Peacock. We've got some residual opportunity north, Rototuna. We've got parts of Rotokauri that could come on at different times. We've potentially got Ruakura if Tainui do that. At what point do we really become a competitive market for development? Because I have the feeling that we're not quite there yet, even though we've got this large pocket of land down in Peacock. We haven't hit that sweet point of competition. So I'm interested, not necessarily today, Jen, because I know I don't want to take it all the time. Can we have a conversation about that?
Yeah, we can certainly get you that information. But I would say that we do have growth on multiple fronts. And while there are a handful of very large developers, there are a multitude of developers doing work in our city. So there is a level of developer competition, or quite a high level of developer competition.
But we're still, yes, I get that,
Yeah.
but they were still constrained by the actual land price. And so what they're building or putting onto the land price is to make something out of that pocket of land, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to understand how we move that, because I think we're all pretty frustrated that we're not tackling land value. Minister Twyford
Yeah,
certainly is.
and look, I think this is a conversation for a briefing, but if I quickly summarise it, the challenge here is what they call the land price appreciation or value capture. What's happening at the moment is that land prices are moving, speculating based on future development without even infrastructure being put in the ground, without even potentially that area being zoned for development. And so what we're trying to collectively tackle here is how do we get ahead of that land price speculation and value uplift, where we as a council can work with those landowners to capture some of that value and put some of that value uplift back into the core infrastructure to ease some of that affordability burden. That's the challenge that we face, all of us. And it's not just a Hamilton challenge, it's for all high growth councils, it's the same challenge. So that, Paula, speaks to that, getting ahead of the market, working with those future growth areas early enough so that we're not a late comer to the table for those critical land discussions.
Thanks. And just as an example of the sort of problem we faced in the past in that area, back about 12 years ago, apart from infill, which was reasonably minor then, we only had Rotatuna as a growth area, and there were some huge spikes in land prices back then, which council started addressing by looking at opening up the other areas. But you're right about asking where the balance point is, and we need that economic analysis to come into us as well.
Because that should determine what your comments you've made about planning ahead, how far we plan ahead, in what detail we plan ahead, because we won't be able to afford to do all the planning well ahead because it's a very expensive exercise. But, you know, we need to have some broad, that's my view anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry, that wasn't a question.
Planning ahead doesn't necessarily mean putting in infrastructure.
I know, sorry, I didn't mean to take that there. We'll have that conversation another time.
Yeah. Councillor Angela, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I've tried very hard to figure out whether my question was answered in this lengthy discussion. So please correct me if I'm wrong. Mr. Chair, in your report, you talk about a significant update and upgrade of the district plan being the desirable thing, that's my word. And I heard Jen say that she's going to report back on a timeline for the district plan changes that we're doing, but are you wanting to propose to include in that, or actually I would like also to have included in that what a full review of the district plan would look like and what that timeline would look like, taking into account Councillor Pascoe's comments about the NPS and the possible throwing out of the RMA and things like that. Is that where you're wanting to go, Mr. Chair?
We certainly have to consider that, and Jen and I have talked about this, and so have plenty of other people talked about whether we do a full review or just review some sections. Obviously I've listed the areas that I think should be considered, including the ones raised by the NPS and the ones that have been raised, like quality infill versus any old infill, whether you do it citywide or only in where your transport nodes and corridors are, those sorts of issues need to be addressed. It may not be every single part of the district plan, but that's something for council to decide, and Jen's going to work that consideration point, if you like, into her timeline.
Yeah, that's right. Councillor Angela, so we would have been required to do a full district plan review in the early part of the 10-year plan anyway. And now that we've got this MPS and the scale of the change that it is going to require us to do, and the conversations that we've been having with you about some of the changes that you want to see, it seems to make sense. We're still doing the work, but it seems to make sense to bring those things together. For just purely from a timing perspective and a cost perspective, but we're working that through and we'll share that information with you soon.
Okay, Jen, and in that information that you'll bring back to us, how will elected members, particularly the new ones, other than reading the entire district plan, how will they be able to indicate to you there may only be half a dozen other areas in the district plan that people might want to look at, or there might be so much coming from elected members that it is a clear indication to you that it's a full review. So how will particularly the new members be able to engage in that bit of the process? How will they indicate that to you?
Well, it is my expectation that all of you will read both volumes of the district plan in the next couple of weeks to enable that conversation to happen, Councillor.
Yes, fabulous. I read it about 4 years ago.
Did you?
I have no intention
I'm impressed.
of talking again.
She's still recovering.
Okay, so I will wait then. So
no,
that's just going to be an action from the committee. It's not seen necessary to be a recommendation.
Look, I absolutely take your point in terms of us making sure that we are gathering the right information from you, and Luke O'Dwyer is in the house and listening, and we will figure out an appropriate way to deal with that without requiring 600 pages of reading.
Put it online, yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Councillor Martin, thanks. Martin's been saving this
To
up.
the new councillors, there's a movie called Groundhog Day, and if you'd like to watch that, watch it a couple of times, then I'll explain its relevance to this council, having been on the council in 1989, where the big mistake was that in hindsight, there should have been more political direction. We left it to staff. I'm not being disrespectful for the staff at the time, and of course this is the result, that we now of course have we are the fourth largest territorial authority in terms of population. We are the third smallest geographically. I have just a couple of questions on this, and then I want to seek whether this is the right place to ask about the KO development in Flagstaff. To the chair or Blair or our GM, as you all know, I've banged on for a long time around the notion of community. I'm hearing structure, plans, urbanisation. I'm also banged on about community of interest. We have existing agreements, HT1, R2, D2, WA, which is that Western Australia, whatever it is. But we have all those things, R2, D2, and so the question at a workshop I want to ask is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of us bringing that much sooner than later, given once the expressway is completed, we've got this bizarre situation with HT1, where you have an island that is totally separated from the West of Waikato District Council, but within HT1, the people who currently live there and are going to develop there have 150% community of interest with Hamilton, definitely not the district. So, Jen, I guess that's a question I want to sort of tease out, whether we move quicker than we anticipate because of that community of interest.
I don't want the specific questions answered, but I put them on the list to be addressed, I think.
Yeah, so that conversation will be had in the early part of the LTP when we're talking about our growth scenarios and how we prioritise all of those different areas.
And Blair, I know, wants to say something on that because that's been sort of dear to his heart, and he's in he's not in R2D2, he's in HT1.
Yeah, I need to declare a conflict. I live in HT1, but notwithstanding that, I think the sooner the better, Councillor Martin, because it speaks directly to that value uplift in land capturing of speculation that's occurring in those areas, because they are all clearly identified as future growth areas. The expressway is going to only exacerbate that perception. So the sooner we can move to bring those more formally into our processes, the better. And that's exactly the process and conversation that Mayor Paula, Councillor Dave, Councillor Jeff and Councillor Ryan have been discussing with Waikato District Council, and that will be the amended agreement we'll bring back to this next meeting, which will enable us to then initiate that process with Waikato District Council.
And just supplementary to that, obviously, and as part of that discussion is going to be, we get our crayon out again because of the Ruakura development, on the other side of the expressway between that and the railway line. I assume Jen and Blair, that will be, we'll have a deep discussion on that.
Yeah.
Right.
That relates to TGH's strategic move as to whether the inner block goes to residential, which will then drive the outer block issue.
And don't, this is very high level general. It's not lost on me when we talk about the Rotokauri growth cell. In Hamilton City, we'll have a high density suburb, but just across the border, we're going to have the low density suburb of Rotokauri, which already exists under a different local authority. So what I'm forecasting here is a calm discussion around what that boundary may look like in the future. Thank you, with the leave of the chair, and I'm happy to ask this under the GM.
Not wanting Kainga Ora and Flagstaff.
No, can I do that under GM?
Perhaps we'll discuss
that is of high public interest.
Yeah, but it's not
just purely an update. That's all. I'm just talking about the issues around notification.
Yeah, well,
all right.
Morning
Thank
tea.
you. Morning tea.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Jeff now. Deputy Mayor, sorry, Jeff. Thanks.
I don't think I'm on the list anymore, Dave.
Oh.
My questions.
Okay, no, fine. We're back to one short follow-up question from Sarah. She's smiling.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. I very, very short questions. Value uplift, Blair, can we have a drop-in session on this? Because we talk about it a lot, but it feels like haven't had any clarity on it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
I think it'll be part of our wider growth discussions.
Jen, when we have a discussion around growth principles and things, can we have some more information around the cost of infrastructure, including both hard and social infrastructure, and ongoing costs of services and maintenance, when comparing intensification in existing suburbs versus greenfield?
It's a question for Chris. I will ask him that question.
Can I just...
Thank you. And last,
Bang on, Blair's got a bit of extra to add. Sarah. Sarah.
Greenfield and affordability. What are we expecting houses to go for in Peacock?
Sorry, we missed the question, Sarah, because Blair was trying to add an answer to your previous one. So tie-hold there for a bit while Blair answers a bit more on your last one, then we'll come back.
I'm sure that if General Manager Chris was here, he would say, Sarah, that the costs of intensification are not that different to the costs of greenfield. So whilst on the face of it, intensification would seem cheaper, there are a number of costs that we need to think about. So certainly that information will be well canvassed when we work through that in the growth discussions. But certainly, and here comes Chris actually, but there are a number of costs in terms of infrastructure provisioning, upsize of infrastructure within the existing parts of the city, and also other considerations such as the increased impact on existing transportation networks and other community assets.
Yeah, that's good. We don't need...
I'd be keen to have a deep dive into that.
Yep.
The last question was, what are we expecting houses to go for in Peacock?
I think that's conjecture, but let's add that into the Peacock report. We might be able to find some info from Karen before we come to that.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, we'll see what...
I mean, the houses there.
Yeah. We'll see what we can find out rather than doing it on the hoof. Okay, look, there's no more questions. I'm going to move my report be received, seconded by Mangai Oli. Any other discussion? If not, those in favour say aye. Those against, carried. Thanks very much. It's unanimous. If it's not unanimous, it should be. On to the... Hang on. No, I can't actually read your writing. Sorry, the next report, the housing strategy development, I've got thousands, a cast of thousands that are interested in moving and seconding this, but I've already had signalled first that Councillor Sarah wishes to move, seconded by Councillor Maxine. I understand there's an amendment being proposed by Councillor Margaret, which Margaret will, while we're having the presentation, we'll just tease that out about how that's going to work. Thanks. And any other people interested might have to go on the foreshadowed list. But we'll take a speaking order. But we've, Tyler, you're going to, is that Tyler?
Amy. I'm going to introduce Amy.
So,
Oh, what are you looking at?
I'm looking at something. Right, okay, no, got it. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong
Councillors, this is Amy Trigg. Amy's been with us. Have you been with us for a year? Since February, so not even a year. And as a senior policy analyst, has been working very closely with Ben Scott and others around this housing initiative. So I'm just going to leave the rest of it to you, Amy.
Cool. Thanks, Jen. Oh, yes, Mike's going. Thanks, everyone. Morning, councillors and Mangai. I guess I'll start, I'm sure, take the report as read, but just work through some of the key points. Around the purpose that we've brought the report here today is to discuss some of those key points in the regional housing landscape. We had Louis and Peter this morning speaking to some of those key points of the Regional Housing Initiative and the Community Lands Trust. So really important parts of what's happening in the region. And then, yes, so our recommendation is that the committee receives the report and that development of a housing strategy is approved and that's delegated for councillors to work with staff to pull together the strategy. So I guess I can just talk to maybe quickly some of the key benefits and kind of what we envisage from the strategy. That would be helpful? Yeah, so there's a lot going on in this space at the moment, I think, is what we've kind of clarified today with the MPSUD, also a range of wider considerations that councillors are interested in, which we discussed at the briefing back in May, which include affordability, accessibility of housing, sustainability, Green Star housing, as well as the wider picture of urban design, urban regeneration, how communities are going to look in future. So we see the housing strategy as a way to incorporate all of these things to give council a voice to have a vision of what they envisage housing to be for the region or the city, and to prioritise those work streams to address each of those individual issues. Yeah.
Questions? Sorry, Amy, I thought you were...
No,
more.
I think
okay,
that's
thanks.
a good point too.
I've got Councillor Pascoe. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Amy, for your report. I'm really struggling with this. It seems to me that there's lots and lots of words here, and there doesn't appear to be an action plan on how we might achieve the areas, particularly the affordability one. We've got lots of examples on page 23 of what other councils are doing. We heard Peter this morning about us getting more involved with the housing trust.
Yes.
Of course, he didn't mention that there was a huge court case that involved Queenstown Council around their involvement. Correct. And of course, that's something that when we set the trust up, we tried to avoid council becoming involved. He's now suggesting that we become involved to make it work. So, do you think that there is while this might be an opportunity, are there instances where we can develop a plan, strategy that will actually work and achieve some results, or will we come back in 2 years' time and still talk about these 5 items under paragraph, 6 items under paragraph 5, and still be struggling with affordability, accessibility, and so forth?
Thanks, Councillor Rob. I think I would say that there's never going to be a silver bullet. It's a systems approach, and council is one part of that. We have specific things that we can move the dial on. The district plan and how we implement that is one thing. Having those strategic relationships and providing linkages between the likes of the Community Lands Trust, speaking with those community housing providers. So there's a lot of opportunities of areas that we can have influence, but I don't think there's going to be a silver bullet. But I think unless we plan for it and unless we take action on it specifically, nothing's going to happen anyway. So I think I think it's key that we start thinking about these questions and see what we can do to move the dial.
Councillor Rob, if I just add to that, in that we've had various conversations about the different elements that make up housing in our city over the course of the last few years, certainly since I've been here, and they all sit in different parts of the organisation. We sit and we have different conversations about different elements of that. What this is seeking to do is to bring all of those strands of that conversation into one place and seek to find a way to articulate what this council would like us to do and would like us to try and achieve. And then to Amy's point, it's a system-wide approach. We cannot do this on our own, but it's about being really clear about what it is we're trying to do and what we can do, what those levers are, so that we're doing, in a cohesive way, doing what we can in this space. But we can't do anything until we've got a clear articulation of that vision, and that's what this initial piece of work is seeking to do.
So the next step then, after the development of a housing strategy, which we've got in 2B, would be the development of an action plan? Or
Yeah,
should
absolutely.
we be developing an action plan now?
Yeah, so I think
that we can actually pick the low-hanging fruit. And obviously, the district plan change is not low-hanging fruit because it takes so long to make any changes. But there must be some low-hanging fruit out there that we can actually pull into an action plan rather than a strategy, which, you know, a strategy to me means another 3 years before we have an action plan.
Look, I think
And it
those
just
two things
worries
go
me
hand
that-
in glove. And the team are already working with a number of initiatives that are doing this work already. So these things are not happening in isolation, and, you know, like most things around here, it's not linear. So this really is to guide the longer term conversation, but that's not to suggest that things aren't happening already.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Amy.
Just before I go on to Mangai, Ollie and Councillor Martin, the amendment that was being proposed was simply to add an extra person to point C. Councillor Ewan Wilson and the mover and seconder of the motion have accepted that readily, so that will be amended to add Councillor Wilson in there to that list. So that particular issue is handled. Mangai, Ollie. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, morning Amy, thank you for your report. Just with regards to point 5.64, where it talks about urban design as a bullet point, can good urban design go hand in hand with housing affordability?
Good question. I think so. I think one of the key things to affordability that we're looking forward, obviously there's greenfield growth and then there's the intensification piece. And ensuring that intensification is done in a way that supports good urban design and communities and walkability, I think that is key, and I think it can be done in a way that is supportable of affordability. I might defer to Paul or someone on that. It's not mine.
I think that when the Urban Design Panel were having the conversation with us too, I think that they would roundly agree with that it's just about a thoughtful design and a thoughtful approach rather than necessarily having to be expensive to create the feels that we would want.
If I could just absolutely, Councillor.
Paul, could you come up to the front
Yeah,
there?
sorry. I mean,
The Zoom speakers don't easily hear others.
Yeah, and just to chip in, I think the answer is absolutely yes. Urban design goes hand in hand with affordability. I mean, urban design is not just about the building, it's about how the community works, how the linkages, how buildings are orientated, solar gain, it's about good thermal efficiency. So design is kind of a more holistic approach, and there's a lot of evidence out there to say there is value attached to urban design orientated development, and that comes hand in hand with some of the other aspects of this very complex web of universal design as well. So, yes is the answer.
Cool, thank you for that. And just reference point 72 of the report, happy as Māngai to make some contribution to the working group, if that's approved.
Thank you.
Are you interested in participating?
Yes.
Well, I'd suggest to the mover and seconder, and they can think about this, to add Māngai Oli as well to that list. And the third, is it part C of the resolution? Part C.
Happy with that, Dave?
Maxine?
Tai taiko that.
All done. Cast of thousands. Okay, Councillor Martin, thanks.
That's just taken care of my question. That's sorted.
Next question?
Yeah, next question is, can you confirm, Jen Baird, this is an excellent report, and please thank all the staff and the author of this report.
That's an excellent question, Councillor.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, Councillor Mark, please.
Just a procedural thing. So with regards to the amendment, can we, apart from the addition of Ewan and Māngai Oli, is that the only change to the...
So far.
Yeah, okay, cool. Hey, just one very quick question. How many teeth will this have? I.e., say there is a big, and I'm picking a big trend towards co-housing and very different ways we're living at the moment. Our rating model is actually pretty prohibitive with co-housing and makes it quite expensive. Will this be able to exact some sort of change, or are we just still going to turn up against the same?
I think that the purpose of this will be to signal that vision. If that's something that council wants to explore, then that's definitely something that would get worked through the likes of the district plan review process. If we wanted to provide incentives or encourage that type of development more or enable it more, that would then come through as part of the action plan of what are the steps we could take to enable that, if that's what
so this will just basically come up with a recommendation that says that's a good idea. Is that right?
It could do, and then it could work, and then the action plan would work through the steps that would be needed to be taken to enact that, if that was what elected members chose to do.
Okay. Councillor Mark, I think one of the key things within this process is to identify all of those levers that Amy is talking about and just make sure that we've got them all set in the right place. So that will be the conversation with you guys in terms of, here's this vision that we're trying to achieve, here's the levers you can pull, are we pulling them the right way at the moment or not, and how do we change those?
Okay. Dave, that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I've got Māngai James, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your report, Amy. One of my questions is just around, because I had a look at the other examples of a housing strategy out there, and some of my thoughts and concerns is just around, a couple of days ago we were shown a deprivation map in Hamilton City, and a lot of that red or deprivation is central. It's quite central in Hamilton. And when we talk about urban generation and design and the like, I've seen examples in Auckland when I think about Port Charles or Port Chev, Glen Innes, where there's gentrification or displacement of those people. So I suppose my question is around, has some of that been thought about in going forward around this housing strategy, and what does urban generation look like for those communities if it starts creating displacement? And then we sort of lose that hold of affordability for their farming or for those communities.
Speak to that, Jen.
Māngai James, I think that's a really important part of this conversation, and I think that it's really important that we've got all the right people in the room to be considering exactly that. A few days ago, when was that? We had an initial briefing about the 20-minute city, and this was one of the points that Professor Ian White brought up as a risk factor, that the gentrification of some of those areas does displace people or have unintended impacts on the nature of the communities there. So I think that the group of people that the team are engaged with now are really focused on the community, those communities as more central communities that you're talking about. But I think it's a key consideration that the team will take on board.
That's my question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, and also I support Māngai Oli putting his name forward. Kia ora.
Thanks. Councillor Sarah, then Mayor Paula after. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Dave. I was just wanted to confirm the timeline for this because we potentially are looking at additions into the district plan from falling out from the strategy. So are we expecting this to be ready in time for any district plan review or overhaul?
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. So the intention and the timeframe that we've set out in the report is that over the next few months, we'll work with elected members and Māngai now to develop the overarching, the kind of the front end, I guess you'd call it, around the vision, the principles, the objectives, and what council actually wants to see. And then following that would be and probably in conjunction with that will be the action plan. So we're intending to hopefully have something ready to start consulting with in the kind of first quarter next year. So definitely any changes that are signalled would feed into that district plan review process really nicely.
Okay, so it's got the strategy, which is kind of the overall vision and issues and things, and then your action plan, which is what we can actually practically do as a council.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks. Mayor Paula, thank you.
Following on from that one now, we're not actually having an overhaul of the district plan, are we? We're having some changes, potential changes to the district plan. Oh, was it not on? Sorry.
Yeah, it was just hard to hear for some reason. It was on.
It is on. We're not having an overhaul of the district plan. We're having, are we? We're not having a complete overhaul, so that's a bit...
We've yet to decide that, Paula.
Well, it hasn't been proposed and it hasn't had a discussion of the whole of council, so I think it's a bit unhelpful to use the word overhaul because it signals out there that the whole district plan is up in the air. Well, we all know through the REAP process that that wasn't the case last time, and unless all my members agree that is the case, and that's incredibly costly, we need to be careful of that. So I just was a bit surprised that that was the wording. But I do think there are opportunities to review parts of the district plan that can be done quite easily. We discussed this all in the last term.
Sorry, I'm not sure what you're referring to here. The resolution relates to the strategy.
No, I was following up.
The last question related to whether bits that would cause the need for district plan changes would be done in time.
No, I get that. Thank you, Dave. But I was just following on from a bit of language that I heard in Sarah's questioning and just asking that that's not what staff are intending to review the overall district plan at this point in time.
So what we are doing at the moment off the back of the requirements for the MPS and the range of district plan changes that council are signalling to us already, we are currently looking at what that will look like and how we line that up with our requirement to do a full district plan review every 10 years and whether it makes sense to bring those two things together.
Okay, so if we couldn't achieve the NPS requirements without a complete, we would potentially bring it closer. Is that what you're saying?
So the point is, so we can achieve the MPS changes without reviewing the entire district plan.
Because it just gets...
But a full review of the district plan is due very shortly anyway. So
So when is it due, sorry?
Year 2 of the 10-year plan.
2024.
Yeah, so we would have to kick that off in year 1 or 2 of the 10-year plan anyway. So given that they are both massive processes, the team are considering whether or not it makes sense to bring them together.
Okay, so it's not like something imminent right now.
No, we're considering it through the LTP process.
That's cool. I was just thinking, had I missed something in respect to that, because we know it's a completely big beast if we go through, which may be the right thing to do. I'm not discounting it. I'm just making sure that we put our horse before the cart. Just in terms of question, I see that the committee, it's a really good report, by the way, thank you very much, and certainly do support the housing strategy. I see that you're proposing to add a couple of members to the group, and what we've ended up with there is pretty much one person from each portfolio except infrastructure. So I'm wondering if it would be useful to have Councillor O'Leary, because there is always, with growth and housing and infrastructure, interface. I know it makes it a bit bigger by one, but it makes it a complete balance across all the portfolios. That was my view. Oh, except for community. Sorry, sorry, Mark. No, finance. Maxine's finance, Rob.
The idea of the committee was a nimble committee that could get down and do some work reasonably quickly for us. And I think the fact that every member on there, apart from Māngai Oli, is on every committee anyway, gets the spread. We can put him on every committee if he wants.
Except infrastructure.
I understand, Mr Chair, that look, if Angela wants, I understand the rest can sit in and participate, appropriately, of course. So I think it's an open door committee, isn't it?
As long as it's not a revolving door committee.
No.
Look, I really didn't want this to get bigger than Ben-Hur because it's coming back to everyone anyway.
Yeah, I agree. But my preference would, since you've got it quite big anyway, with that one member, and I do think that would add great value. Angela's a senior politician with a lot of experience across these matters, and a lot of experience with the district plan in the past, etc. I think she'd add value.
Well, there's two things. One, we haven't stopped any name going forward to that committee of anyone that's keen on being on it. And nor are people stopped from attending it, as Councillor Gallagher's pointed out.
Well, I'd like to suggest, if she's open to it, that we put her name in, Angela's name in. She may not be.
Angela, did you want to go on to this committee, working group, I should call it?
I hadn't thought of it. I mean, certainly if the mayor wants me on there, I'll go on there, but I'm not too sure how much. Bigger committees slow things down. Yeah, and I'm assuming some staff will be involved at some point to keep an eye on that, the infrastructure consequences and stuff.
Yeah, and staff will be actually running having to administer the committee and draw in the right people for the right discussions.
Yes, absolutely. Councillor Andrew, I assume you mean that the right people within Evalisa's team?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, they'll be involved.
And I mean, if the meetings are going to be in the council building, then I'd be happy to attend those in an informal.
Angela, we'll add you to the list with the approval of the mover and seconder. Since I can see you're so keen.
With that. And I just want to note that I would really be keen and would support us, having kind of an open session policy as such, or at least having, some regular drop-in sessions. Because
Councillors, sorry, Sarah.
Value to add to it.
Sarah, I think we're getting into nitty-gritty that's not necessary here. All of our working groups are like that anyway.
Yeah.
So let's get to the motion. If we've got no more speakers, Paula, sorry, do you have any other questions?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, so we've, in C, and I think Amy's got this lined up, we've added Councillors Wilson and O'Leary and Māngai Oli to that list. Other than that, the motion is as stands. It's moved by Councillor Sarah, seconded by Councillor Maxine. Sarah, do you wish to speak to it?
Just very briefly, Dave.
Okay, off you go, thanks.
Cool, thank you. I think there's little question that we do need to be proactive in a space, and we're really fortunate that we have the Regional Housing Initiative, which is a great foundation to collaborate with others, and which has already been doing some of the groundwork in terms of research that we can build on. We need to understand where we fit in terms of the housing ecosystem and what roles we can play. As was mentioned by Amy, there's no silver bullet. Council can't solve this by itself, but we still need to look at what levers we can pull. And it's not just affordability, it's also looking at accessibility and quality of housing as well, so that new housing going in is actually warm and dry and energy efficient and all those things. So really excited that we're embarking on this journey of creating a housing strategy and looking forward to working with you on it. Thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Martin, please.
Will support the motion, and I think Councillor O'Leary will make a very good contribution, because one of her roles is going to be, and Councillor O'Leary has spoken on this, about the failures, the historical failures of aspects of our district plan when it came to the housing intensification and some of the negative aspects, and certainly she and I have spoken on that, so I fully support that. Also, if I look at the people going on, that also represents, by and large, the new generation of leadership of this city. I will, however, call out the Mayor in the sense that I do not intend to be defined by a portfolio she may or may not give me. As an elected member, we're across all of the portfolios at all times. So I do see this committee not as a portfolio committee, but each of those members, if you look at their extensive CVs, they will bring a significant skill base to the table. As Dave's reminded us, the rest of people, including myself, can certainly pop in and listen in to that committee. I would obviously assume that you're going to engage, for example, Brian Squares from the urban design panel. So I think, you know, in terms of the terms of reference in item 5 are going to be really good and on the button. And to a degree, the work that you're going to do probably may help inform the degree to which we engage in our review of the district plan, and whether, as the GM has mentioned, whether we bring that major review forward or not. So I'm certainly thinking this committee, excellent membership, are going to do a good piece of work.
Thanks. Mayor Paula, please.
They're going to do a good piece of work. They're incredibly passionate, and I want to say a big vote of thanks to both Sarah and Max for the work that you put in behind the remit that we're going to speak to tomorrow at Local Government Conference. So, you know, I do believe in harnessing, as Martin rightly says, new ideas and new thoughts, new members. I do think that Angela can add value, but, you know, I wasn't going to die in a ditch over that. I was taken by surprise by the composition happening. I was unaware of it. But I think it will be a really good group. And it's a very important topic. And I think it's really important that they report back to full council quite regularly, because we've all participated in a conversation about housing today, and we've all raised our questions. And so just one thing is not to get too far ahead of us, bring us on the journey with you, because we all need to understand this most crucial issue if we're going to have any chance of success through the long-term plan, through the regional plan potentially, and any other mechanism to address housing. We need to work together on this. But no, well done everyone. I think I'm looking forward to seeing what you can produce.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Jeff, then Councillor Maxine before we're back to this board.
Thanks, Chair. Very briefly, very happy to be involved with this. Look forward to the challenge, and it is a challenge, an enormous one, as we heard from Louis earlier on. And I think developing a housing policy is really timely, in fact probably overdue. As Jen mentioned earlier, housing is such a fundamental issue. It really needs to be handled cohesively in a way that crosses multiple areas and has some teeth. It needs to be punchy and direct. As Rob referred to, you know, there is urgency here. And I also commend Sarah and Maxine for the work they've already done on this and the passion that they will bring to this. There's a couple of clear linkages for me, I guess. I expressed concerns about our infill policy currently and the way it's worked, and I really want to be part of the creation of a better policy. Secondly, there's some synergy with my Central City Advisory Group on. Obviously, there's a real need for significant intensity in the Central City. The new NPS on urban development has reinforced that. Our advisory group's done a lot of work so far on improving on how we might improve amenity in the Central City and infrastructure, but I don't feel we've yet turned our attention to exactly how we're going to attract, you know, multiple apartment complexes and that type of stuff. How can we do this in a way that really is going to move the dial? And how do we balance our commitment with all these greenfield developments that we've been talking about with infill? You know, which way should we be going? And how can we do things differently, perhaps? And absolutely endorse the membership there, Ewan and Angela. And I was going to put up an amendment to get a Manga Māori on, so I'm thrilled that I was there too. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Maxine, please.
Kia ora and thank you, Chair. Affordable housing is an issue of interest that Sarah and I have both taken up since being elected. And during the lockdown, we used the time that we had there to further that inquiry by looking at what the complexities were, by understanding some of the solutions, and really by having and building some relationships with those in the sector and with the expertise. It was really great to hear today from the Regional Housing Initiative and the Community Lands Trust, two groups that I hold a great deal of respect for, but also Kay Southall-Smith, who's a great expert as well with some of that solutions-based ideas. We've seen in the report that the fundamentals of housing strategy is understanding the who, the what and the where, and if we don't do that well, we won't really have a very clear understanding about what part council can play and the levers and tools that we've got available to us. During Louis' presentation today, he talked about the median house price in Hamilton, and it's more than 6 times that of household income. That is unaffordable, and that we also do have a shortage of more than 1,000 houses according to their stock take. I'm really excited tomorrow about being able to speak to the LGNZ AGM and presenting Hamilton's remit. That was developed in conjunction with Christchurch, and thank you to staff and to Sarah for collaboration and putting that together. Thank you. It's well supported. It asks for 3 things. That a working group be set up, and that through that working group with affected councils, advocacy to government for an NPS around housing affordability, but also that we ask government to give us some of those enabling tools like the inclusionary zone, specifically that, because that takes away the really great risk of long and expensive challenges from developers around any kind of inclusionary zoning. However, affordable housing is just one aspect of the housing strategy, and there's lots more work to be done in order to be able to put that together in a way that will solve the problems that we're talking about. And setting up the system for a wide approach is really critical. So that work will help us focus. It'll create and strengthen those relationships. It develops an action plan, and that's the part that Councillor Pascoe wants us to be able to vision up. But it's also a way for us to be able to put clear direction around how we might be able to resolve those issues. So I'm really keen to be a part of a working group, and I'm excited to see that there's more of us involved in this conversation and to take up that challenge. So thank you very much, and I'll be, of course, supporting the motion.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Hamilton, then Bunting, and then back to right of reply.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, look, I'm really happy to support the motion, and just want to echo what Deputy Mayor Jeff was saying, particularly with regard to Sarah and Maxine, who've been quite proactive in this space, and have been talking about it from the get-go, as has Councillor Ewan. So I look forward to seeing the work carry on. I guess just as a caveat, I think it's really important that you all remain holistic in the approach. That, as Maxine said, housing affordability is only one piece of it, and the word affordability is quite a blunt tool that we hear all the time, and obviously affordability means different things to different people. When we had the population guy in here on Tuesday, the professor, talking about the different typologies that are trending in Hamilton, I think that would be a really important criteria for the workshop that you guys will be, or the criteria, because not everyone wants a duplex, not everyone wants an apartment. Some people are setting up a family and want a 400 square metre section. So it's really important that you're holistic in your approach, I think, and to get some real identities on the typologies we need and the demand for those typologies, because that will be really key to delivering fruitful outcomes. So look forward to working and supporting with you all on that.
Councillor Bunting, thanks.
You just hate it when the speaker immediately before you says exactly what you were primed up to say.
So I can move on to the next speaker.
But no, but without the wit and talent. Absolutely endorse what Ryan was saying, and I was getting quite worried, with ultimate respect and love to Councillor Van Oosten, that all that was being spoken about was affordability. It is just a part of the work I see, and holistic is a great word to use, Ryan, because you build enough affordable houses, but it's also got to be sustainable. So you plonk a whole bunch of affordable houses in one place. What does it do to the ensuing community? So there's a really interesting body of work to be done in there. And so I'm really pleased to see the balance of thinkers, experience and youth in that group. For heaven's sakes, give yourself some sharp teeth. Give yourself some sharp teeth. You're going to need them to work with the development community. But the development community are not the enemy. They just want a clear set of guidelines within which they can make money. And so be strong, but be clear with the developers. Have some strong teeth to be able to bear against central government. Because as I said when Professor White was here the other day, it's great to have the 20-minute city. It's great to have a housing strategy. But if the government doesn't agree with you, the government gets what the government wants. So have some teeth. Be prepared to engage and be strong with and against the government. And have some teeth with our rates department as well, because at the moment I believe our rating system makes it very hard for Papakainga and that community housing type model at the moment with the way our SUIPs are set up. I know a lot of people who want to bring their elderly people home, but it's because they have an extra sink, it's going to cost them twice the rates. And so there's those little exercises. I hope this group has the teeth to challenge those. So yeah, go forth, enjoy. Hope to pop on to some of these meetings, but very supportive of it.
Thanks. And Councillor Rob got in just before the closing time.
It's like betting at the TAB, isn't it? Yeah. Look, I also want to endorse and thank the work that Councillor Sarah and Councillor Maxine have done on this, and wish them well as they continue with this. I also agree with the last two speakers that I think affordability is only one of the points that we need to look at, even though it irks me when I see greenfield sections currently being offered in Christchurch at $185,000, comparably with Hamilton offering similar size sections at $450,000. So I think that there is some scope around affordability, but I think, as the other speakers have alluded to, there are other areas that are important in terms of how we grow and how we develop this city. I'm still a little concerned about the fact that we're embarking here on a strategy, because we've been doing that the whole time I've been on council, and we haven't really quite got to that action plan yet. And I would like to see this strategy, as the enlarged committee work on it, quickly morph into an action plan at the same time of developing the strategy, that they pick up on the low-hanging fruit that can be turned into immediate action, rather than waiting to develop this report and then going on to the next stage. So I hope we're nimble enough to do that. One other concern I've got is that I have yet to see the commitments to an action plan from the community. And we saw that to some extent over the Housing Trust. And I hope, listening to this morning's speakers in the public forum, that the sector will become a lot more active in this space and help not only with the strategy but also with the action plan, and that the strategy doesn't become simply a report and lots of talking. It actually morphs itself very quickly into some tangible results. So I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Now, look, I've got Councillor Margaret's just come up on the screen. Margaret, your turn. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. I'm actually going to support the last four speakers, and the big thing for me was that this is more than just affordable housing, so I'm really pleased that my colleagues have brought that up. So it is, for me, about people and the environment as well as being affordable, so it's making sure that we really meet the needs of the people living in the homes, as far as healthy homes and environmentally performing homes as well. So as far as being homes that are warm, dry, and are able to function with our environment, not against it. The other thing that's important for me is that design is key, and supporting what Ryan pointed out too, that this means offering choices for people in different ages and stages and needs of their lives. So just going ahead with one offering is not in my mind where we need to be heading. We've definitely got to be offering a choice of lifestyle, and that means working with existing communities as well. We've all seen the result through Kaingoora and Flagstaff when we don't work with existing communities about how we're going to build brownfields. So that's really important. And lastly, I think that we really need to elevate the role of the urban design panel, because design is absolutely key. If you get it right, spaces and places and people just soar. If you get it wrong, the consequences are just dire, not only for today, but for the future as well. And it affects everything. It affects people's health. It affects, from an economic development point of view, it affects value. And from a council point of view, if we get it wrong, we end up paying double. We pay at the time, but then we end up paying in the future as well, as we have to refit and retrofit and get things right. So I really encourage us to, as part of that housing group, that we look at the role, again, of the Urban Design Panel and also the makeup. So I mentioned it before that I believe that Urban Design Panel is not just about architects, but it also needs to include potentially a creative and potentially an environmental expert, somebody who's got an environmental lens to contribute. Such an important thing. So thanks very much, and I really wish that group well.
Thanks. Sarah's brief right of reply now, thanks.
Very brief. Thank you for the past speaker, to the past speakers. Really good points raised. Agree, it's definitely more than just about affordability, and we need to look at demographics and all sorts of things. Just one point, Councillor Rob. I would say that the community already is, really committed to this. If you look at the Regional Housing Initiative group, it is huge in terms of who's there. There's a huge range of different groups from different sectors of the community. And Well Energy has, I understand, committed quite a significant sum to that group, and part of that a small part of that did go to the Community Lands Trust. So it might be worth coming along to one of the sessions at one point, but there definitely are a lot of people from the community involved. Thanks.
Thanks. Rob's smiling. Okay, councillors, we're going to go to the vote, and I'm going to try this by physical show of hands, both Zoom land, which we're going to show all the thumbnails. Yep, and there. So raise your hands if you're in favour. Okay, anyone against? No one against. That's carried unanimously. Thanks. Councillors, let's break for about 9 minutes, back at 25 to 12. Thanks. which Andrew is speaking to. There he is. We're right on Zoom land as well. So, Andrew, would you like to present the report? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll be very, very brief on this one. So as people will know, over the last 3 years, central and local government have been looking at various solutions to the challenges in relation to Three Waters. And that work has seen the development of new legislation and the creation of the new water services regulator to look at drinking water in particular. But in addition to those regulatory matters, there's also an acknowledgement of the broader challenges that's been facing local government as a whole in relation to water services and infrastructure, and then the communities that rely on those services. So you will see in this report that in July 2020, this government has announced a reform agenda that in part includes a funding package of $761 million to help stimulate the economy and also to assist local authorities to maintain and improve water infrastructure, whilst at the same time in setting up a framework for engagement in the broader reform agenda. So to join this reform, which is a non-binding engagement at this particular part of the process, it requires the signing of an MOU, which is attachment 1 in today's report. And signing the MOU, it's going to clearly signal two things for this council. So one is that we're committed to fully engaging and working with government to explore the structural reform in relation to the delivery of Three Waters. And number two is by committing to this collaboration, it gives us access to some economic stimulus funding as well. The key team within HCC for this tranche of work is essentially Blair Bowcott and Myri Porter and myself. And I'm just going to hand over to Blair, who will talk a little bit about some regional engagements in this space. But the fund that comes with signing is $8.73 million that's attached to Hamilton City Council, plus an equivalent sum which is sitting in a regional fund. But I'll hand over to Blair, who will talk a little bit more on that.
Thank you, Chair and councillors. So with regards to the reform program, one of the features of the reform program is looking at structural delivery models and how councils can work together to deliver Three Water services in a different manner. And you'll recall our journey of a few years ago where we explored with both Waipa and Waikato different forms of council-controlled organisations to deliver Three Waters within the future-proof area. That's a fundamental part of this reform direction. So to that end, the Mayoral Forum had a discussion earlier this week on the Waters Reform Program, and in particular, the Mayoral Forum wanted to take a view on the regional portion of funding and the regional approach to these discussions for the reform agenda. So the Mayoral Forum agreed unanimously that the portion of money allocated to the region to apply to the reform program should be divvied up and passed back to each council in the same proportion as the funding that we are allocated directly. So in simple terms, that means the $8.73 million that we have been allocated through the reform program, a further $8.73 million will come from the regional allocation of funds, meaning that Hamilton City Council will have $17.46 million to apply to Three Waters stimulus projects. The councils of the region also talked a lot about how they would work together, and in particular sub-regional conversations and sub-regional collaborative initiatives and working with the government. And so to that end, the future-proof councils, Hamilton, Waikato, Waipa, have strongly committed to supporting and applying some of their funding towards some of the initiatives that are already working through the future-proof councils. That will obviously come formally to this to council for consideration on the 17th of September. But we do currently have a Three Waters sub-regional study, which is part-way completed, but there's a funding gap, and so the councils have agreed that we would each wish to put that forward. In addition, we're involved in a detailed business case process for both the northern and southern metro wastewater solutions around this metro area, and so the councils have agreed, subject to obviously formal ratification, that we would also seek to put our funding for that project through the stimulus projects. We've also, at the Mayoral Forum, talked about each council setting aside a portion of money to participate with the government in this reform discussions, because we know from our journey last time that requires a considerable amount of resource, not only staff but potentially advice that we may wish to get to help us as a council put forward our best thinking and best advocacy with the government on the structural reform models that will be considered in the coming periods of time. So those conversations have started. Mayor Paula has been a very strong advocate for both working sub-regionally and regionally, but also inter-regionally. And we've had some initial conversations with the Bay of Plenty councils, in particular Tauranga and Western Bay, to reach out to also signal that we would like to work with them in a collaborative manner as we start to talk about alternatives and different ways of delivering three water services. So very, very encouraging conversations. It's fair to say that not every council in the Waikato has the same view, and that's to be expected. This is quite a fundamental look at how three water services will be delivered, and that will have different impacts on each council and each community. But nonetheless, there's a strong expectation, and I guess a strong desire from us that as a big metro council with good experience and facing considerable challenges in the delivery of three water services in the medium long term, as a high growth council, that we should show some leadership here, and we should work proactively with the government and with our partners to explore this reform program together. And of course, that doesn't presume that we'll make any formal decisions at this time, but it's participating fully and deeply in the process so that ultimately we can get the right outcome for New Zealand in terms of how we meet the challenges of delivering three water services now and into the future. So I think, Andrew, that's the sort of high-level summary of the conversations today.
Thank you. So the whole of the reform agenda is set out on one page in attachment 5, but essentially the request today is just to sign the MOU to engage in that non-binding discussion to help shape the reform agenda going forward. So, happy to take questions.
Thanks, Councillor Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. And it certainly appears to be some good news in terms of advancing this whole water thing forward. I guess you've answered the fact that we're in we're in the running for about $17.5 million. I assume that that's our proportionate share of the $761 million that government have signalled is available for the sector.
So the government has allocated about $50 million to the new drinking water regulator establishment, right. And there's some other allocations as well, which just escaped me. But then they have a allocation model that's based on population as a proxy for connections, plus the geographic size of the councils. So they've used that to determine the allocations, and they've, the share for HCC is the 8.73 plus every council has an equivalent amount sitting in a regional pot.
So if other councils don't subscribe to their memorandum of understanding, or that they don't want to participate in this, which I suspect, I can't really see why they wouldn't, but if they did, does that pot widen and our allocation becomes greater?
No, but the rules are very few. So for the city to access its 8.73, you must sign the MOU.
Yep.
For any council in this region to access the regional pot, 2/3 of the councils in the region must sign.
Okay.
And then the fund is treated as a grant, so it can be whatever you wish it to be. So it could be operating budget, capital budget. There's no constraints on what you use it for back here.
I'm not expecting any council in the region to not sign the MOU.
Okay, so that answers the next question, that 2/3 that we will then get access to the other $8 million from the regional fund.
I'm already aware of 2 or 3 of the councils have already advised that they've agreed to the MOU, and certainly all the others are very much in that direction. So.
Okay.
I think the key there, Councillor Rob, is it's a non-binding participation. The MOU runs through to June 2021. Yes. In simple terms, the government is saying in good faith we want to work with any council that signs the MOU, and that's absolutely clear. And we would expect, and I think through the Mayoral Forum and the Chief Executive Forum, we'll want to encourage each of those councils to work proactively with all of us, and with Hamilton having a strong role to show some leadership there to help put our best foot forward as a region with the government in terms of these conversations.
So you've mentioned, I think I've got the feeling that there's not going to be a lot of conditions around how we actually spend the either of the $8 million that we anticipate that we're going to get. So will they just pay the cheque out and ask us to go away and come back to them afterwards and say, well, here's how we've spent it, OPEX, CAPEX, but it's been on water-related projects.
No, so there's a framework for that as well. So there are very, very few constraints, but there are some constraints. So they've made the allocation, they've published the financial allocations. So if council signs the MOU today, the next step will be for council to sign off on the things that we would put forward for funding. We would need to prepare a delivery plan. So that's a simple 2-pager because they're looking to minimise the workload here. But because it's public money or Crown money, they just want to know exactly what we're going to achieve for the individual projects, you know, job creation, some key milestones, delivery dates. And so those plans would need to be furnished. They'll be assessed by Crown Infrastructure Partners against the intent of the fund. So they're placing a higher priority on Two Waters, but still there is a priority on stormwater. And then once it's been through the Crown Infrastructure Partners assessment for fit, you know, with the intent of the reform, then it goes to the DIA for the final approval and release of the money. Once the money is, or the projects are approved, 50% of the fund would be transferred to Hamilton City Council effective immediately, and then the balance would then come across as the work is done. Okay. And then the last couple of constraints, just to get them all on the table, is an absolute requirement. You must start spending the money before March 2021, so you start spending before that date. And the fund will cease on March 2022, so that's your last day to draw the last dollar down.
Okay, thank you.
So just through the chair, if I can just expand on that, because I think it's worth adding to that. So the timeframes are very tight here. So we must have the MOU agreed and signed by the end of this month, hence today's meeting. We must have the projects identified, the funding agreement and the delivery plan for each of those projects agreed and submitted by the end of September, next month. The government have 1 month to review those proposed projects, and they make a decision by the 1st of November. And so theoretically on the 1st of November, our projects for stimulus should be agreed, and the 50% of the funding should be advanced to enable us to start work on those. And as Andrew said, we've got 16 months to deliver those. They must be all completed and spent by March 2022. So to help staff determine what are the projects that we're going to request the funding for, you'll note in the recommendations that we've identified for chairs to work with staff to finalise the recommended list of projects that we would submit to the government. We're very conscious that there's a range of factors to consider here, and that'll be part of the assessment process that staff will work through with the chairs. But also, really, really importantly here, we've got to actually be able to deliver these things. So whatever we recommend, we need to be actually able to make it happen and finish it within the time frame, and that is quite a real constraint for the things that we'll be putting forward. So we have a number of ideas, and I've touched on a couple of those in terms of some of the existing future-proof based initiatives. There are also some opportunities around projects that could support some of our other initiatives, particularly in the growth space, where there are some Three Waters challenges that may alleviate those. And there are also some opportunities around some operational aspects which may also improve the resilience of the network. So there'll be a range of things that the staff will present, and they'll be ranked, and they'll ultimately come forward to council. But we are, given the time frame, on the 17th of September when it comes to council, we're seeking council to approve those projects because we really have to lodge those with the government within a matter of a week of that meeting.
Thank you. And one final question, Chair, if I may. In terms of the discussions that you've already had and possibly what you might anticipate, has there been any indication from central government that they might insist that we give priority to areas in terms of our water where we are out of step with the rest of the country? And I cite here one example that I'm aware of, and that's residential water meters.
No, there's no directive along those lines.
And you don't anticipate that they'll come back and say, this is what we think one of Hamilton's priorities should be?
No. I think In the agenda and the memorandum of understanding, I'm just going to refer you to the page. There is the broad descriptions as to.
I noticed it was, but sometimes the devil's in the detail, isn't it? That, they might kind of front up and say, well, hang on, you guys, you've got some old pipes somewhere that need to be sorted, or you need to put water meters in, or, so they might use a bit of a heavy hand to say where we might put some of our initial priorities.
No, look, I think that this is a relatively high trust approach, and they are very much relying on the councils to provide the best advocacy back to the government based on those criteria.
Yep. Okay, thank you, and that's all good news. Thank you.
I was looking forward to water meters too. A great campaigning tool. No, thank you. Councillor Martin, thanks.
Yes, item D, totally get the portfolio approach on this recommendation, and obviously if the relevant chair cannot attend, then automatically the deputy chair rocks up. I'm just wondering if consideration had been given to also the chair of environment being represented on this one, given the very critical environmental nuance, and these projects are profoundly significant when they come back to council.
Happy to take the direction of this committee and add in.
Yeah, I mean, I respect it has to be small and tight. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to make the Ben-Hur approach, but I just think if you look at the portfolio and our commitment in that area, it's that nuance may be helpful, that's all.
Yeah, I'll work on that with the mover and seconder.
Yeah, okay, that's cool.
Sorry, I've got the list from Zoom land, starting with Angela, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking at, I've got a couple of questions, but just looking at the recommendation, if the words in D, instead of the list of stimulus projects, if that could be changed to be more, to provide more clarity, that says that recommend the list of projects for the delivery plan. I mean, I'm not going to dive a ditch over it, but I just think we use stimulus projects. I feel like we've moved past that and we didn't get any money in. This is specific to the elected members here putting together the list for the delivery plan. So just throw that out, yeah?
Angela, sorry, Angela, I think that's fine to add that in, to change that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the mover is accepted.
Yeah, so just a couple of questions. Andrew, you said, I think it was probably just a slip of the tongue, you said a priority would be stormwater, but that's not correct. The priority is drinking water. Stormwater can only be included in this list if it's deemed effective or where effective. So was that just a slip of the tongue?
It was. So the priority is clearly two waters, potable water and wastewater, but stormwater is still open to consideration. So it's not ruled out. It's just the framework provides a higher priority for the two waters, but the third water is definitely in there.
Steering away from stormwater because it's a bigger ticket item.
Yep.
There's something else that you said. I think you sort of clarified that in terms of there not being many constraints. One of the constraints that does concern me, and it was there in the stimulus package projects that we did as well, was the how it supports job creation. In your talks with the powers that be and Crown Infrastructure, whoever's DIA, whoever's managing this fund, is that going to be something that's the top of their list? Because it just hampers us a little bit, I feel.
My take is that they're simply looking for us to make a disclosure in terms of job creation. It's not an assessment requirement in itself. They simply want a very simple two-pager around what would the Crown get for the money. So it's up to us to specify those things, but there's no threshold requirements in there, but they are looking for us to simply state what jobs would be created as a result of a particular project, and also what some of the delivery milestones might look like for that project, simply in the context that it is public money that's been spent. So they just want to have some
Okay.
Understand.
So it's your view that the DIA we won't be hampered by picking the projects only that might create jobs?
Not from what I've seen to date, no.
Okay.
And that's not intended to be a guarded comment, by the way. It's just a.
No. Yeah, I get it.
Councillor Angela, it's Blair.
Also, from my reading of the MOU, it appears that we would have to, although you're saying, first question, there's two, the first 7 million has been announced, so we know we're going to get that, and then that can be spent on projects. The second 7 million, is that, because that's coming, is that targeted to us to have to spend that either regional projects or regional collaboration? Is that how that's going to work, or no?
I'll let Blair take that one.
Okay, thanks.
So Councillor Ange, I'll answer your earlier question as well in terms of jobs aspect. I think we'll be very careful around how we articulate the answer on that. So job creation is a bit of a challenge because it's also job retention. We need to think about it in that context as well. So I think through our experience, through the shovel-ready and other stimulus works, we've got to be very careful around what we say and what we promise around FTEs and jobs. It's a very tricky area. So it's one of many lenses that I think that we will apply to this, but one that my sense is it's not the big focus here. The bigger focus is the outcomes that we're delivering in terms of improvements to the Three Waters service. In terms of your question around the regional portion of funds, the decision of the Mayoral Forum this week, effectively we will be writing, or the Mayoral Forum will write back to the Minister of Local Government shortly, and effectively that will just double our allocation to Hamilton City Council. So our 8.73 million becomes 17.46 million. So what we'll be talking about at Council next month is $17.46 million worth of projects in the delivery plan. So that money has not been funneled through the region. The region just had to meet and agree how are they going to approach that. The region decided the best way to approach it would be to apply that money directly back to the councils.
And thanks, Blair. And is there any restriction on this? Does it have to be new projects, or can we retrofit and upgrade and maintain current assets and systems?
You can do all of that. One of the key requirements is it can't be spent on things that are in your annual plan. But you can do all of the things you've mentioned.
Can't be spent on anything in the annual plan. Okay, so all right, on this annual plan, but we could take something from year 2 or year 3.
That's my understanding.
Okay, just one last question. Thanks for the indulgence, Mr. Chair. It appears to me from the reading that we have to forward fund this stuff. Is that correct or not? And second part to that question, how will we plan for overruns? Because we know projects can overrun in cost, and would that affect the agreement?
So the first question, forward fund. So no, the intention here is the council wouldn't forward fund. Hence the government's intention, which is to transfer 50% of the money to Hamilton City effectively on signing. So there would be no sense of forward funding. In terms of the risk around delivering on time, that is a risk that sits with this council, hence the need to put up projects that will be finished by March 2022, because if it's not finished at that point, the funding tap will be turned off. So cost overrun or failure to deliver by March 2022, those are risks that would sit with council as a deliverer of the projects.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I think just to give councillors some confidence, the initial list that the staff will provide the councillors to help in this guidance, I think you'll find that there's a range of options there which will meet the types of questions and answers that have been given here to date, and I think very much they'll be realistic, practicable, deliverable, but also delivering a range of outcomes, both in terms of some of the sub-regional initiatives that we're pursuing, but also delivering, Councillor Angela, to some of the things that you're alluding to in terms of immediate impact, or impact that creates employment, but also things that actually move our Three Waters ahead in terms of where we want to go.
Thanks. Moving on to Ewan, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Chairman Dave. Look, my question was similar to Angela, and I just want clarification. I see in the recommendation that we're going to have the chairs helping to form the projects, and I had immediately thought this was an opportunity to take some of our CapEx funding for water in the annual plan, but what I think I've heard you say is actually that's the one thing we can't do. So if that is correct, could you again just clarify, is there any way we could manoeuvre subsequent years to make that work? I'm just trying to work out how we could actually try to save 8 million and reprioritise it rather than have to spend an additional 8 million from what we've already committed.
I think you can, but as staff, we've developed a draft list, and we're very keen to sit down after this meeting and work with the committee chairs to refine that list and deal with some of or respond to some of the matters you've just raised. So I think the intent from DIA is it's additional money to improve the water business. So hence, their desire that it not be used to fund anything that's already funded in the annual plan. But I think there's certainly scope to pick future water projects and deliver them now.
So Andrew, that would be great news for all of us, because I think uniformly across this council there is a desire to try to start living within our means. And if that means we could pull something out of year 2 and year 3 and help balance the books and get a good outcome, that would be something to really look forward to, and I'll let the chairs drive that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just on the chairs, sorry, the mover and second have agreed to add in the chair of the Environment Committee, subject to Margaret being happy to do that, into the Part D there. Is that all right, Margaret?
Yes, please. I was about to suggest that just before Martin's did so. Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, look, we might as well stay with you. You can jump ahead of Jeff. He won't mind, will you, Jeff? No, Margaret, you had a question anyway.
Sorry, say that again.
Sorry.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sorry, I added the element of confusion. Margaret, you had a question anyway.
Oh, no, that was it. Sorry,
Okay.
I didn't take my hand down. It was
Sorry.
asking about...
Apologies. Yeah, Jeff,
being added to that group.
back to you. Thanks, Jeff.
One hand's down as well.
Oh, okay. It's falling like flies. Okay. We have no one else on the list. The resolution with the slight changes to D, to add in the chair of the Environment Committee, and to change the wording from list of stimulus projects in the middle of D to, what was the word? Oh, it's up there. Well, it's about to be. Just hang up fire. There we are. A list of projects for the delivery plan for council to consider, etc., in red there. So that's been accepted, those changes, by the mover and seconder, which is myself and Ryan, as chair and deputy chair of this committee. Are there any speakers to this? I'll start really briefly, just simply to say that I'd like to thank staff for taking the opportunity and working out how we can make best use of that. We have been waiting for the answers on stimulus projects. As Angela pointed out, I'm not sure that it's correct to say that we haven't got anything, but the way we're getting them is certainly not the way we quite envisaged. But if it means that it can improve the outcomes for the city, and including finances, I think that's worth taking. I think, like Blair or Andrew, I'm not sure, one of you mentioned that it was going to be a struggle to meet the target finish date of March 2022, and that's going to be the challenge, is getting projects that not only do that, but they are ones that actually we need to do in the city, and they're not, and they're potentially going to save us money further down the track. That's good. I know there's some issues in Rotokauri which may be able to be fast-tracked in this area, depending on how the committee comes up with things, and that's been a struggle to get that growth cell off the ground because of the large water-related infrastructure projects. So anything that might help in that area, anything that might help in our future ability to provide the three waters for the future will be good as well. So I'm all for this work, and once again, thanks staff for their concoction of a good way to handle it. So I've got Mayor Paula, then Councillor Rob.
Thank you, Chair Dave. This is one of the biggest opportunities we've had in a long time, because not only is the burgeoning cost of water one of the biggest costs that local government all around the country face right now, it's also a really huge opportunity to do things better than we've ever done them before, in a way that is more effective in terms of its outcomes for the community, but also is more cost effective. We have been here before. There's a little sense of Groundhog Day in some respects, but this money is considerable, and the opportunity to really turn up the dial in terms of what we're doing with water is incredible, and we need to go after it. I did push the Mayoral Forum the other day in a number of ways. First of all, that they still need to, even though there's money distributed to the individual councils, to have some local control over. Firstly, we do need to participate proactively and strongly in this water reform debate, because water reform is coming. So what shape it comes in is going to be influenced by the people that can make a positive difference in that conversation and demonstrate success. So I'm really happy with the way that we're working with Waikato District and Waipa District over the Southern Water Initiative and the like. I think that's exactly what we should be doing. And we should go after some support to do that. But we also need to be mindful. We can't be blind to the fact that government's made it reasonably clear that they're looking at considerable water reform across the country, and you cannot be using this money for business as usual. You cannot be doing water the same way, because if we don't adapt and change, government will come in and make us change. And so, you know, do we take a lead or do we follow? Smaller councils are going to have different sets of problems coming at them, but they also are going to be required to amalgamate in some shape or form with others to deliver the best water service. There is no way about that in the long term. The other area that I was pretty keen on was just, well, two. So one of them was just that we shouldn't put our head in the sand about that. We should be proactive and look at delivering the best results for our ratepayers, both locally and at a regional scale. The other part of that is that in order to do that, we need to have some resources to work together. So I did try to ask them to put a small portion aside to create a regional-wide working focus on reform. But we didn't quite get there. We've got a slightly softer approach than that. That's okay, that's what we've got. Now I think we lead by example. I'd like to think that we think broadly about these projects that we might apply for. They shouldn't all be related to growth, but they should be related to water pressures. So there are some pressures in existing areas as well, because of things like infill and stormwater. And stormwater is the big issue, by the way. We have got water quality as the focus. We want safe drinking water, but the costs around stormwater are immense, and the whole program is not fully understood. So we still need to think about that, because old parts of Hamilton are on some pretty old stormwater systems. So just keep that in your view. But thanks to Blair and the team, Andrew, all of you, for putting together this and brokering an agreement, which is not always easy to do across the Waikato region, but brokering an agreement that most people could get alongside. So let's go forward from here.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Rob next, then Angela, then Martin.
Yeah, and look, this is good news. Apart from the financial benefits, we're seeing central government recognising a national problem, engaging with councils and nudging councils to work together and promoting more resilience and better financial outcomes in the water space. Even though we started our journey back in 2014 and we failed to get our neighbouring councils across the line with us, we did, as a result of those reports, find that we would improve our resilience, their resilience, and also achieve significant financial outcomes for our ratepayers if we did some major reforms around water. And you know, since then, and particularly since 2016, water woes have become more apparent and of national concern. And this is part of the reason why I think the government, central government's now engaging. And I talked about these on Tuesday at our retreat about Havelock North, about the issues in Wellington and Auckland. I don't think we'll have any problems finding projects, because there will be parts of our water network where we can use this money to improve our resilience going forward. I also have a concern that the percentage of residential rates allocated or funded through is now around 34%. It was 26% back in 2016. So we do have cost pressures coming on in terms of the delivery of our water, and hopefully being able to work with our neighbouring councils, we'll be able to find some good outcomes that will result in savings back to ratepayers. Thanks.
Thanks. Angela, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm very supportive of the previous speakers and very supportive, obviously, of us signing this MOU. I am a little gun-shy when it comes to applying for money, but certainly we've already been told we're getting the first lot, so that's a really great thing. I really do want this invested in our infrastructure, so Dave and I might be arm wrestling over amounts that go to growth and amounts that go to the current infrastructure, because this is money that we hadn't planned for, and it is an opportunity for us, I think, to invest early and to bring some of the infrastructure up to standard that we may have had pushed out to, say, years 2, 3 or 4 of the LTP. I'm particularly interested in, or will be particularly interested in, those projects that will increase our resilience to hazards and risk. And I think that that's the top priority in terms of drinking water, but for our whole network, that's, again, our capacity for resilience concerns me. So I'm interested in what projects we may be able to put in there, but also, as Mayor Paula touched on, it does feel, and Rob did, it does feel a little bit like Groundhog Day, but that some of this money will be able to help us finally get a regional a partnership and forward-thinking approach to water. We have to do that anyway. We are going to be in one of these water boards. So, yeah, I'm keen to have some of this investment towards finally getting something off the ground there as well. And I know that the Chair has done, in past terms, has done a considerable amount of work in that space as well. Thank you. And thank you for making those changes for me. Thank you.
And I'm going to practice my arm wrestling tonight. Martin, thank you.
Yes. I hope I'm not misinterpreting Her Worship's report from the Mayoral Forum, where I think she was wanting a more regional approach, and that didn't quite get across the line. If I was a teacher and I was grading local government over the past few years, I think Havelock North, I think possibly of Watercare in Auckland. I certainly think about the failed attempts to get a new water model across the line in the Waikato. Probably a D minus, D plus. the days when small territorial authorities think that they can run it by themselves and that is economically and environmentally sustainable are gone. We, of course, are in the extremely fortunate position as a city that we have a infrastructure which is obviously challenged, but we certainly have the professional expertise in terms of our staff in this area, but certainly that is not duplicated or could not be duplicated in a small TA with 10 or 12,000 people. And we need to remind ourselves, and Councillor Robb has stressed this, in spite of our best efforts, and we thought the compromise was going to be the shared services model. One of the TAs went to Auckland, cool, not criticising that, and the other TA by one vote shot it down. So we're back to square one, and I don't know what public money was spent of ratepayer dough in that whole failed exercise. There is an old saying, and I think others have reminded us, do or be done to. And I would totally understand if local government doesn't step up to the plate, why central government of whatever political colour that may be will do it for us. I think we're in the last chance saloon, and now is the time to really tell our regional partners, be proactive, or transfer your decision making holus bolus to Wellington.
Very good, Martin. Okay, look, there's no other speakers. There's no right of reply needed for this. The resolution was up on the board, sorry. It's 2 with the changes to D there, thanks. And it does scroll through to the end of H, part 2 there, yep, thanks. So, councillors, I'm going to do this by show of hands. Those in favour, please raise their hands. I'll just check everyone on the screen as well. That's unanimous. Thanks very much. Councillors, let's move on to item 9. We may not finish this before about in the next 20 minutes, but Lucy will help us finish it. Let's put it that way. Lucy and Greg, thanks very much. The Rotokauri detailed business case, item 9. Floor is yours, guys.
Good afternoon, councillors. Well, I'm hoping that we can be quite prompt with this and help you get through things. I'll take the report as read, but basically I just want to give you an update on the infrastructure funding and financing legislation and also where we're at with the Rotokauri Stage 1 detailed business case. There has been a change since this report was done, which is this report says that the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act is going through royal assent. That's actually now been achieved, so the legislation for IFF is now in place. It's a tool that we, as a council and wider than council, it's a tool that can now be used. And also just to acknowledge, which I've done in this report, but really acknowledge the role that council has played in the development of that legislation. So it's quite a milestone for us now that's actually up and running and a tool that we can actually use. That's all that I had to say on the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act and the legislation. What I will say now is that Crown Infrastructure Partners are obviously very ramping up, should we say, their Rotokauri case for using the IFF tool. We're very much at a point now where we're starting to understand what a transaction might look like in Rotokauri, which leads nicely onto the business case. The business case is just going through final proofing now. So what will be coming to you very imminently will be the full Rotokauri Stage 1 detailed business case. And also I'm very conscious that that's a very long and detailed document. So I've also produced what I'm calling an overview document, which is 20 pages. It's really concise. The idea is I've basically given it to a few people as dummies to say, can you read this and understand what we're talking about? And the unanimous answer has been yes. So tomorrow, hopefully, you will get the full detailed business case and also an overview document. And then next Friday, so the 28th, where I've organised a virtual Zoom for you to ask questions. Hopefully you will have read at least the overview document, but be able to ask any questions on the business case. Ready for what we're calling an agreement in principle at the 17th of September council meeting. And the idea with that is Crown Infrastructure Partners are really wanting to now start to understand whether a Rotokauri IFF transaction is looking realistic and really want to start to get into the detail of what that might look like. They want to give an update to their board in October to say, yep, council want to accelerate the infrastructure needed in Rotokauri so that we can progress with those detailed negotiations. Obviously, that agreement in principle is very much subject to LTP, the LTP process, but it's just enabling us to come to you and say, do you agree with what we're saying in the business case, and can we continue the work? And also we'll be coming to you to basically outline what resources, funding might be needed for us to progress with those commercial negotiations. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Lucy. Ryan's moving this and I'm seconding the motion. I've got questions from Mark, then Jeff, thanks.
Thank you. Just two really simple questions, just more for my information. Our DCs out that way are quite substantially higher. Is that still the case?
Yes.
They haven't changed. That's up for review at the LTP.
Right. And have we had any signals from the community, the business community, about how willing they are to invest out that way or build that way with the DCs the way they are? Or?
Well, under this proposal, things are quite different. So if we're successful with funding from the IFF, and if there are significant savings realised under a private developer agreement, then obviously the council's spending a lot less than anticipated, so DCs are less, but there's a levy out there, so the DCs will be significantly less, and the funding mix will be different. So yeah, there's a few things to think about there.
So there's some levers we can pull to make it easier. Right, cool. And secondly, and this may sort of come as a slight left of centre question, but I'm looking at all the swales, and it's very based around swales and open drains and the likes. I'm often wondering about the safety of swales with small families and kids and the likes, and I worry around Green Hill, etc., that there are these areas where kids can just wander down into. Has there been much work done on the safety of those if we are building residences around swales?
Yeah, the management case within the business case obviously considers the programme and considers things like that. So yeah, that's very much something that we've thought about. And
what did you come up with?
I think, Andrew, you had a good explanation for this last time.
Andrew, do you want to come somewhere where there's a mic?
So the swale is this is a very, think of it, it sounds big, and it's very wide, but it's essentially just a shallow depression in the land in its context. So I know you think it's deep, and it is, but because it's got quite a wide footprint, and I've forgotten the exact width now, but it's 40 to 60 metres wide, it has the effect of being a relatively shallow depression, and it won't have a lot of water in it on most days. It's there for the significant rainfall events, the 1 in 100 year event, which in Rotokauri is 2 weeks of heavy drizzle. And then the sides of it would be benched as well. So if in the very unlikely event someone went into it, there'd be an easy way to climb out. There's still a lot of work to do in the design though around the operational safety, but it's been an active consideration in the designation to date. And remember, the designation to date is around establishing the footprint. There's a good photo of it on page 98 in the agenda pack.
Yeah, I was looking at that. And look, I certainly don't want to get in the way or distract from the discussion, but I just want to flag that I am worried it doesn't take much for a small child to drown.
I agree with you, but it is an active consideration.
Okay.
But where in the process has been about protecting the corridor, there would be a lot of additional operational safety considerations in the design and then the construction phase as well. But the matters you've raised have been forefront in our mind as they are on all of the infrastructure that we look at delivering.
Good to know. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Mark. Jeff, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just on point 42 on page 92, I think it is, it talks about a divergence of timing expectations and the fact that despite legislation, CIP wants us to put up money first, early on. Was this new, or is this different from what we've been going on till now? I'm just trying to work out what the financial implications are of this.
No, this is something that we've been going through with CIP kind of since I've been at council, which is a year, and then previous. One good thing with the legislation now, that one of the changes that was made is that pre-construction costs now can be considered under an IFF arrangement, so that's great. And then also now, as mentioned in the report that came previous to me with the water reform, it's potential that some of those initial costs could potentially come under that as well. So we are looking at ways to solve that, what I'm calling a bit of a funding gap, and also working with CIP over the past few weeks on what their accelerated programme might look like. They are starting to change their approach slightly. So that's something very much that we're in discussions with CIP on.
So does that mean the figures that would be required for an accelerated development there are consistent with what we've been seeing in recent sort of sessions? We have seen some figures for what we would need to invest early on. So are the figures similar to that, or is it changed? Is it worse?
As far as I'm aware, the figures haven't changed. It's just when we bring those costs on board, when we need to spend that money. But equally, now that those costs could potentially be covered under the legislation, that might be good for us as well. Okay.
And the second question, does approving this today raise expectations and in any way commit us or send a signal that we're going to proceed with this, with the full accelerated package and using the IFF?
We've been very clear with CIP that any agreement in principle is very much subject to LTP discussions and part of a much bigger story. The agreement in principle is just to enable us to continue with those detailed negotiations and allow us to continue with the work. It's definitely not a commitment that we're going to go ahead. They very much know it's part of an LTP process. It just allows us to continue.
So there's no sense that we're going to have trouble extricating ourselves. We are going to be disappointing or somehow surprising CIP if we don't take it up.
I think the reason they want us to kind of give an agreement in principle is that we are committed to continuing with these commercial discussions that we're having. But I've just tried to make it as clear as possible that it's got to go through council and it's very much part of a wider LTP discussion. So they do obviously hope that we're going to go forward with Rotorua. It's been the case study since the start of going through the legislation, but there's definitely not a yes, we're committing to it.
I think
it doesn't bind us to that.
No.
And Councillor, I think this is. Just to add, it's more of an endorsement to proceed, and that there's visibility from a political level. So there's been a lot of work in the background and through staff, and so we want to surface this up and just have an indication that for staff to proceed without any commitments. And as Lucy said, we've made it perfectly clear that there are a lot of, there's a lot of parts of this process, including, substantial public consultation and debates and everything that goes along with it. So it's to give the parties that we're talking to some comfort that at a political level, it's understood in which direction we're heading.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Chair.
Hey, Mayor Paula, thank you. Okay, thanks. Councillor Rob, thanks. And then you and...
Thanks, Chair. Look, couple of questions. One, we talk about the detailed business case. Is that a different methodology business case than the Better Business Case, which is known as BBC, and one that we used for the Peacock case?
Yeah, so our basis is the BBC. The one thing that we've changed in that is, I think I've mentioned previously, that we really wanted to take a place-based community approach to the development of Rotorua. So we have incorporated what was previously just solely an economic case. We've now changed that to a wellbeing case, which covers all 4 wellbeings, of which one of them is economic. So basically it is a BBC business case.
With another overlay over the top.
Yeah, with another overlay of really taking on board a community wellbeing approach to it.
So it doesn't produce any different financial outcomes
No.
than the BBC case would. So when we get this report, there'll be some comparability with if I use Peacock, which we did as part of the long-term plan.
Yes.
Okay. Just a follow-on question from Deputy Mayor, and that's also around paragraph 42. Have Crown Infrastructure Partners indicated to us what would make them move away from the table if we fail to come up with a certain level of funding to keep them interested in their style of funding? Because I read, perhaps similarly to Jeff, that they're looking to be incentivised to stay at the table, and I guess they've done some sums, and they're expecting us to have some sums done too that we might have to seriously consider as part of the long-term plan to keep them interested.
For an IFF arrangement, it all centres around the certainty for any deal. So obviously they're trying to raise private finance for an IFF, and also there will be a government support package if things go wrong. So they want as much upfront work to have been done before they do what they're calling a financial close on an IFF arrangement. So as far as we can go to providing them with detailed designs and those kinds of things will help.
But don't we have to commit to do some of that work too, which translates then into having to put some dollars on the table to actually undertake that work, whether it's at the same time as they are funding, or before they put any dollars on the table?
Yeah, correct. And when we come to you formally for an agreement in principle, we are going to provide some advice on what those costs will be and what work needs to be done, so that it's really clear that if we want an IFF for Rotokauri, these are the things that we're going to have to do. And potentially those pre-construction costs could be covered by an IFF arrangement as well.
Okay. Surely though they've got to assess their risk too.
Yep.
And if there is a delay, not caused by us, but in terms of a delay either from the developer or from the consumer wanting to buy the sections, then their capital investment, which is already either committed or invested, remains dormant, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Until those sections are actually up and running.
Correct. Yeah, there is quite a tight programme of things that would need to be done in order for us to utilise the IFF tool.
So in the discussions to date, do you anticipate any issues around council not being able to deliver within the confines of the next long-term plan and what's in the current long-term plan, the appropriate levels of funding to get the project to the CIP stage, the CIP agreement stage?
Yeah, I think it is clear that some things are going to be required up front, which will require some funding.
Yep.
It's just how quickly we want to do things will determine whether the IFF tool is available for us to use.
So do you think, though, I mean, the questioning I'm coming to is, will we be challenged financially in terms of our long-term plan to be able to keep the Crown Infrastructure Partners still interested and incentivised to continue with their investment?
So that is a good question. It's a key question. That's the financial case and the business case, effectively. So without trying to explain it in a couple of sentences.
We'll get that tomorrow.
As a full-blown financial analysis.
And a chance to talk specifically about this.
Absolutely.
Next Friday, is it next Friday? No.
And on the
17th. Oh, let's get our dates right. Tomorrow you'll be sent the business case and the overview document. Then next Friday, which is the 28th, I've organised a virtual session to ask questions. And then 17th of September council meeting, you'll make a decision.
So I'm best to leave these questions until then.
You might have a lot more answers when you read the financial case.
Chair, can I just give a sort of high-level comment, just to give council some assurance? So if we stand back and remind ourselves the two parts of this, the Rotokauri business case is about understanding what does the Rotokauri community look like in terms of all aspects to deliver a fantastic outcome when that growth cell is delivered and what all those elements of it. The second part is, how do we fund that and how do we meet the challenge collectively with the development community and ourselves and other parties to meet those costs? So what Lucy and Greg are talking about is we know we have a funding gap because the current LTP has the main costs of Rotokauri at the very back end of the 10-year plan and in fact beyond year 10. The IFF tool presents us a way to help advance some of that infrastructure, but it's not without its challenges because we know the IFF tool won't fund everything. We still, as a council, have to work with the development community to find the other pieces of the funding puzzle. What Lucy and Greg are really saying is for us to be able to find that solution, all parties are going to have to come to the table with solutions and money. In the case of council, it may be some additional requests in the LTP, it may be some additional requests on the 17th of September, but at the same time, that may provide us the opportunity to access the new IFF tool to advance Rotokauri. One thing I would point out is that if council does choose to spend some money to accelerate Rotokauri, it's not money that we wouldn't otherwise spend in the future. I think that's a really important point. At some point, Rotokauri, the money has to be spent to develop the growth cell in the manner as described in the business case. It's just when and by whom, and that's what really Lucy and Greg are describing here. Council may be asked to and consider to advance some monies to enable the IFF tool to be deployed earlier, but it's not bad spending. It'll be spending that council would be required at some point to invest. It's just when we choose to. So if ultimately we say no to advancing some monies to support that, it just means that Rotokauri will develop in a slower or more fragmented way until those pieces of infrastructure are delivered. So that's the key conversation that ultimately will be required by council.
I'm going to stop it now because of some other time pressures. We'll come back to you after lunch, and also you and Paula and Sarah. I'm afraid, due to what I said earlier, we need to stop to allow 45 minutes before the 1:30 start. Before we stop, I'm going to move now that we move into public excluded to enable some information to be given to you about the process for 1:30 onwards. And then after we've finished all the PX, we'll come back into the open. So I'll move that we go into public excluded, seconded by Ryan. Sorry, Bunty, he beat you again. So just before, those in favour, against, it's carried unanimously. I'd just like to mention